The Arizona Territory was a hard place to survive in 1867. The sun beat down mercilessly on the parched earth, turning the soil to dust and drying up streams before summer's end. It was a land where only the stubborn or the desperate tried to carve out a living, and Jackson Hayes was both. Blood seeped through his shirt, darkening the already dirt-stained fabric as he crawled across the rocky ground. The wound in his side burned like fire with each movement, but stopping meant death. He'd been ambushed 3 miles back, 2 riders who'd appeared from nowhere, taken his horse, his supplies, his rifle, and left him for dead with a bullet in his ribs. Night was falling, the temperature dropping rapidly, as it always did in the high desert. If blood loss didn't kill him, the cold would. Jackson's vision blurred as he dragged himself toward a cluster of juniper trees, hoping for some meager shelter. That was when he saw the figure tall and still against the fading light watching him. Jackson reached for his sidearm before remembering the bandits had taken that too. He tried to call out, but his parched throat produced only a rasp. The figure approached, cautious but deliberate. As it drew closer, Jackson could make out the features of an Apache man, perhaps 50 years old, his face weathered like the surrounding landscape. The man's dark eyes studied Jackson, weighing something in his mind. Jackson had fought Apaches during his army days. He'd killed men who looked like this one. Now helpless and bleeding, he waited for the retribution he'd always half expected would find him. Instead, the Apache knelt beside him, examined the wound, and spoke in broken English. "Bad, but not death yet." The man glanced around, scanning the horizon. "Can you walk not safe here?" Jackson tried to rise but collapsed back, the world spinning around him. The last thing he remembered was being lifted, the Apache's surprising strength supporting him as consciousness slipped away. He woke to the smell of burning herbs and the soft crackle of a small fire. Pain still radiated from his side, but duller now, more distant. Jackson blinked his eyes, adjusting to the dim light of what appeared to be a small cave. The Apache man sat cross-legged nearby, grinding something in a stone mortar. 3 days, the man said without looking up. "Fever bad. Better now." Jackson touched his side, finding a poultice of herbs packed against the wound held in place with strips of cloth. "You saved me." Jackson managed his voice rough from disuse. The man nodded once. "I am Takimi." He pointed to Jackson's bandaged side. "Bullet passed through. Good fortune." Jackson tried to sit up, grimacing at the effort. "Why help me?" "You don't know me." Takimi's eyes held Jackson's for a long moment. "I know enough. You were soldier." It wasn't a question. Jackson nodded slowly, wondering how the man had known. Perhaps the old scars, or the way he carried himself even when wounded. "Yes, but not anymore." "Good." Takimi returned to his grinding. "War brings only sorrow." Something in the man's voice, a depth of pain beyond the simple statement, made Jackson look more closely. Now he noticed the dried blood on Takimi's shirt, the pallor beneath his copper skin. "You're hurt too," Takimi shrugged. "Does not matter now." He set aside the mortar and looked directly at Jackson. "I need something from you, soldier." "Name's Jackson. Jackson Hayes." "Hayes." Takimi nodded. "I need something. A promise." "What kind of promise?" "My daughters. They hide. Not safe." He gestured toward the mouth of the cave. "Soldiers came to our village, many dead. They hunt survivors." Jackson felt a familiar twist of shame in his gut. He'd been part of such hunts once. "How old are your daughters?" "Nara 9 summers, Kimi 7. Takemi's stoic expression softened slightly. They are all that remains of my family. What happened to your wife? Taken 2 winters past. Sickness from the white man's fort. Takemi's face hardened again. Now soldiers burn our homes. I fought, was wounded. The girls ran as I taught them. Jackson began to understand. You want me to find them, take them somewhere safe. Takemi nodded. They hide near the dry wash below the Red Ridge. Know the place. Jackson did. It was maybe 5 miles from his own small homestead. I know it. But why trust me with this? I was a soldier. Was, Takemi emphasized. And now the Creator puts you in my path. He leaned forward, intensity in his gaze. You owe life debt. I ask payment. There was no arguing with that logic. Whatever Takemi's reasons for saving him, Jackson did owe him his life. I'll find them, Jackson said finally. But what then? Where should I take them? Not take, protect, until safe again. Takemi reached into a small pouch at his waist and withdrew something, a strip of deer hide with blue beads sewn into an intricate pattern. Show them this. Tell them, ahehe, means thank you. All I can teach you now. Jackson took the beaded strip, feeling the weight of what he was agreeing to. Your wound, let me help you first. Then we'll go together. Takemi shook his head. Too late for me. Wound festers. He pulled back his shirt to reveal an angry red gash across his abdomen, the skin around it blackened. I used last medicine on you. Jackson felt the breath leave his lungs. Takemi had used his last healing supplies on a stranger, on a former enemy, while his own wound worsened. Why? He asked the question barely audible. My daughters need living protector, not dying father. Takemi's practicality was devastating in its simplicity. Promise me, Hayes. Find them. Keep them safe. Looking into the dying man's eyes, Jackson could do nothing but nod. I promise. Takemi seemed to relax slightly, a weight lifted. Good. He reached out and gripped Jackson's forearm. One more thing. If soldiers come asking, they were never there, Jackson finished. I never saw them. For the first time, Takemi smiled faintly. Perhaps Creator chose well after all. Takemi died before dawn. Jackson buried him beneath a cairn of stones outside the cave, marking it with the man's own knife thrust into the ground at the head. He had no knowledge of Apache burial customs, but he said the only prayer he remembered from childhood, hoping some god somewhere would understand. The journey to his homestead was slow and painful. His wound, though treated, still limited his movement, and without a horse, the miles stretched endlessly. When he finally crested the ridge that overlooked his small cabin, the sun was already setting on another day. Jackson stood looking down at the humble structure, little more than a shack, with a lean-to for his few goats. A thin wisp of smoke still rose from the chimney where the morning's fire had died to embers. It wasn't much, but it was his, bought with the last of his army pay, and built with his own hands after he'd left the service. Left was a polite way of putting it. Discharged in disgrace would be more accurate, though the official papers said otherwise. Captain James Miller had given him a choice, a dishonorable discharge and possible court-martial, or a quiet resignation with papers that wouldn't follow him. All because Jackson had refused to participate in one last raid on an Apache camp that intelligence had confirmed held mostly women and children. Not a coward, he'd told Miller, just not a butcher. Miller had called him a traitor. An Indian lover said he was betraying the memory of every soldier who'd died fighting hostiles. But in the end, the captain wanted to avoid scandal more than he wanted to punish one disobedient lieutenant. So Jackson Hayes had walked away carrying nothing but bitter memories and the knowledge that he'd finally drawn a line too late for too many, but a line nonetheless. And now here he was, a promise to keep to a man who should have been his enemy. As Jackson approached his cabin, he kept a wary eye on the surrounding terrain. The attack that had left him wounded might not have been random. In these parts, a man living alone was a target for bandits, deserters, and outlaws of all stripes. Inside, he found the cabin undisturbed. He stoked the fire-heated water and properly cleaned and redressed his wound. Takemi's poultice had done its work well. The bullet hole was already closing cleanly. Jackson ate a sparse meal of cornbread and jerky, then gathered supplies, a canteen of water, the last of his cornbread wrapped in cloth, a bit of jerky, and a small tin cup. Into his pocket went the beaded strip of deer hide. He wouldn't make it to the Red Ridge tonight, but at first light he would set out to find Takemi's daughters. Sleep came fitfully haunted by dreams of battles long past. In them, the faces of Apache warriors he'd killed morphed into Takemi's face, their dying eyes asking why. He woke before dawn, sweat-soaked, despite the cool night air. The Red Ridge earned its name. Honestly, iron in the stone gave it a rusty hue that blazed like fire in the morning sun. Jackson moved carefully down the slope toward the dry wash Takemi had mentioned, scanning for any sign of the girls. He found nothing. At first, no footprints, no disturbed brush, no sign that anyone had passed this way. Then again, Apache children would know how to move without leaving traces. It was a skill taught from earliest childhood. Jackson reached the wash and followed it, looking for places where children might hide. The terrain offered plenty of options: overhangs, thickets of mesquite, shallow caves worn into the sandstone by ancient floods. He was about to give up when he spotted it, a small, smooth stone placed atop another in a way that couldn't be natural. Moving closer, he found more tiny signs that would be invisible to anyone not looking for them. A bent twig, a small clearing in the dust that could have been made by a sitting child. "Hello?" he called softly, then remembered the word Takemi had taught him. "Ahihi!" Silence answered him, but Jackson felt eyes watching. He crouched, setting down his supplies on a flat rock where they could be seen. Then he backed away several paces and waited. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Jackson's wound throbbed, but he remained still patient. Finally, a slight movement caught his eye, a small shadow detaching from a larger one beneath a mesquite thicket. A child so still, she seemed part of the earth, watching him with large, dark eyes. Jackson made no sudden moves. He reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew the beaded strip, holding it up so she could see it. "Your father sent me," he said, though he doubted she understood English. "Takemi." At the name, a second child appeared beside the first, slightly taller, her posture protective, as she placed herself partially in front of the younger one. Both girls were thin, their clothes torn and dirty faces smeared with dust, but their eyes were alert and wary. The older one, Nara, he presumed, studied him with a gaze far too old for her years. She whispered something to her sister, who responded without taking her eyes off Jackson. Jackson set the beaded strip down beside the supplies and backed away further, sitting on a boulder. "Food," he said, gesturing toward the items. "Water." The girls remained motionless for a long moment. Then Nara whispered something else to her sister and crept forward, moving in a half-crouch, ready to bolt at any sudden movement. She reached the rock, snatched up the beaded strip, and examined it intently. Some tension seemed to leave her small body when she recognized it. She said something to Kimi, who approached more cautiously. Together, they gathered the supplies, their movements quick and efficient. They ate hungrily, but carefully, making sure not to drop a single crumb. When they had finished, Nara looked directly at Jackson for the first time. Her dark eyes held questions he couldn't answer without words they would understand. Instead, he pointed to himself. "Jackson," he said, then gestured to her. "Nara." He pointed to the younger girl. "Kimi." Nara's eyes widened slightly at hearing their names. She nodded once, a barely perceptible movement. Jackson pointed toward the direction of his cabin, then made a walking motion with his fingers. "Come with me." He patted the ground beside him, then pointed to his cabin again. "Safe." The girls exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Nara clutched the beaded strip tightly in her small fist, then shook her head. She pointed to the wash, then made a staying motion. Jackson understood. They wouldn't come with him, not yet. Trust would take time. He nodded, accepting their decision. He would have to earn their confidence just as Takemi had earned his in those brief hours. As he stood to leave, he hesitated, then spoke the question that had been weighing on him. "Your father?" He made a sleeping motion, then pointed to the sky. Nara's face remained impassive, but Kimi's lip trembled. Both girls clearly understood what he was asking. Jackson nodded sadly. "I'm sorry," he said, though the words felt hollow. He touched his heart, then pointed to them, trying to convey that he would return. As he made his way back up the ridge, he glanced back once. The girls had vanished, as if they'd never been there at all. Over the next weeks, Jackson fell into a pattern. Each morning he would leave food and water at the flat rock, sometimes adding small items he thought might help: a small knife, a length of twine, once even a blanket he could barely spare as the nights grew cooler. Each time he would return later to find the items gone and some small token left in their place. A perfect feather, a strangely shaped stone, once a crude drawing scratched into the dirt that might have been two small figures standing beside a larger one. The girls never appeared while he was present, but he could sense them watching. Occasionally he caught glimpses, a flutter of movement, the flash of dark eyes from behind a rock. They were growing stronger. He could tell from the increasing distance of their tracks from the meeting place. They were ranging farther, perhaps, hunting small game or gathering plants. With each visit, Jackson spoke a few words naming things around them: water, rock, sky, hoping they might begin to understand him. He never stayed long, always giving them space, always returning to his cabin alone. In the evenings he would sit outside his door, looking toward the red ridge, wondering if he was doing enough. Takemi had asked him to protect the girls, but how could he protect them when they wouldn't come near him? What would happen when winter came in earnest? The answer came on a bitter cold night in early October. Jackson woke to the sound of something scratching at his door. Not the usual wind, but deliberate. Hand on his pistol, he rose and approached cautiously. "Who's there?" he called. No answer came, but the scratching continued. Jackson unlatched the door and pulled it open, half expecting to find a coyote or even a small bear. Instead, he found Kimi huddled on his doorstep, her small body shaking violently with cold, or fear, or both. Behind her, supporting her, stood Nara, her face a mask of worry and defiance. Jackson stepped back immediately, gesturing them inside. "Come in quickly. It's freezing." They didn't understand his words, but his meaning was clear. Nara helped her sister across the threshold, her eyes darting around the cabin, assessing exits, threats, safety. In the dim light of the banked fire, Jackson could see that Kimi's face was flushed, her breathing labored. Fever. "She's sick," he said, pointing to the younger girl, then to his own forehead, mimicking heat. "I'll help." Nara's expression remained guarded, but desperation had driven them here. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. Jackson guided them to his narrow cot, the only bed in the one-room cabin. Nara helped Kimmy lie down, then stood protectively beside her, watching Jackson's every move. He stoked the fire, bringing light and warmth back to the cabin, then fetched water and a clean cloth. Kimmy's forehead burned beneath his touch as he laid the damp cloth across it. She whimpered, eyes fluttering, but not focusing. "Pneumonia, maybe," Jackson murmured, "or just a bad cold." He looked up at Nara, who hadn't moved from her sister's side. "I need to make medicine," he said, pointing to the herbs hanging from the ceiling beam, his own meager supplies, "like your father did for me." At the mention of Takimi, Nara's eyes flashed with some emotion, grief perhaps, or anger. But she nodded again, granting permission. Jackson worked quickly, brewing a tea of willow bark for the fever and adding honey to make it palatable. When it was ready, he brought the cup to Kimmy, but the girl was too weak to drink on her own. Nara took the cup from him and lifted her sister's head, speaking soft words in Apache as she helped her drink. Kimmy sputtered, but managed to swallow most of the tea before falling back against the rough pillow exhausted. For hours, they maintained their vigil. Jackson preparing remedies, Nara administering them, neither speaking except when necessary through gestures and expressions. Outside, the wind howled around the cabin corners, driving snow into drifts against the walls. Near dawn, Kimmy's fever broke. Her breathing eased and she fell into a natural sleep, her small face relaxed for the first time since they'd arrived. Nara, still sitting beside her sister, swayed with exhaustion. Jackson, who had been dozing in his chair, rose and fetched his only other blanket. "Sleep," he said, pointing to the floor beside the cot. "I'll watch over her." Nara shook her head, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Trust me," Jackson said softly, "as your father did." Something in his tone must have reached her, for Nara's shoulders slumped slightly. She took the blanket, arranged herself on the floor beside Kimmy, one hand still touching her sister's arm. Within moments, she was asleep. Jackson settled back in his chair, watching the two small figures in the fading firelight. A weight he hadn't recognized pressed on his chest, the knowledge that these children's lives now depended on him, a man who had once been part of the force that destroyed their world. "I'll keep them safe," he whispered to Takimi's memory. "Somehow." The morning brought clear skies and a tentative new reality. Kimmy was better, still weak, but the fever was gone, and she ate the thin porridge Jackson prepared with good appetite. Nara remained watchful, but the desperate edge had faded from her posture. Neither girl made any move to leave. Jackson, unsure how to proceed, focused on practical matters. He brought in more firewood, patched a draft in the wall near the floor, and checked on his goats in the lean-to, all while giving the girls space to decide their next move. When he returned from his chores, he found Nara examining the beaded strip that Takimi had given him. She looked up as he entered, her expression questioning. Jackson approached slowly and sat on the floor near her, respecting the invisible boundary she maintained. He pointed to the beaded strip, then made a giving motion toward himself. "Your father gave it to me," he said, "before he died." Nara studied his face, then said something in Apache. She pointed to herself, then to Kimmy, then to Jackson, her gesture including the cabin around them. "Yes," Jackson nodded. "You can stay, as long as you need." The enormity of what he was agreeing to settled over him. 2 Apache children in his home, in a territory where tensions between settlers and natives grew bloodier by the day. If anyone from the nearby town discovered them, there would be questions he couldn't answer, suspicions that could turn deadly. But looking at these 2 girls, orphaned, hunted with nowhere else to go, he knew there was no other choice. This was the debt he owed Takimi. Perhaps it was also a way to balance the scales for all the wrongs he'd been part of in his former life. That evening, as Kimmy slept, and Nara sat near the fire, Jackson took out the tobacco tin, where he kept his few valuables, a worn photograph of his parents, a letter from his brother written before Antietam, where he'd fallen, and now the beaded strip, which he placed carefully inside. For safekeeping, he told Nara, showing her where he placed the tin on the shelf above his bed. She watched with solemn eyes, then reached into a small pouch at her waist and withdrew something, a tiny carving of a bird no bigger than his thumbnail, made from pale wood. She held it out to him. Jackson accepted the gift, turning it in his fingers. The workmanship was exquisite, each feather detailed despite the small size. "Thank you," he said. "Ahihi." Nara's eyes widened at hearing the Apache word from his lips. For the first time she almost smiled, a slight upward turn at the corner of her mouth there, and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. "Ahihi," she repeated softly, the first word she had spoken directly to him. It wasn't much a single word, a fragile beginning. But as Jackson placed the tiny bird beside the beaded strip in his tobacco tin, he felt something long dormant stir within him. Not hope exactly, but perhaps its distant cousin possibility. The days that followed established a cautious routine. Jackson continued his work around the homestead, tending the goats, repairing the cabin roof before winter set in, fully hunting when supplies ran low. The girls gradually expanded their presence, moving from the cot to a pallet Jackson constructed for them near the fire, helping with simple chores that required no instruction, sweeping the floor, carrying water from the spring behind the cabin. Communication remained mostly gestural, though Nara began to repeat English words Jackson used frequently: water, fire, goat. Kimmy, once recovered, proved quicker with language often pointing to objects around the cabin and looking at Jackson expectantly until he named them. "Chair," he would say, or "spoon," or "roof." She would repeat the word carefully, committing it to memory. By the end of the first month, she could name nearly everything in the small cabin. Nara remained more reserved, watching Jackson with a gaze that seemed to search for something beneath his surface. She was unfailingly protective of Kimmy, always positioning herself between her sister and any potential threat, including Jackson himself at times. It was Kimmy who first breached the invisible barrier between them. One evening, as Jackson sat mending a harness by firelight, she approached and sat beside him, pointing to the leather strips in his hands. "What doing?" she asked in halting English. "Fixing," he replied, demonstrating how he threaded the rawhide through the holes. The leather broke. Kimmy nodded seriously, then held out her small hands. "I help?" Jackson hesitated, then handed her a short length of rawhide. "Like this," he said, showing her how to knot it. Her fingers, nimble despite their size, copied his movements perfectly. She looked up at him with a shy smile of accomplishment when the knot held. "Good," Jackson said, returning her smile. "Very good." From across the room, Nara watched this exchange, her expression unreadable. But that night, as Jackson lay on his pallet near the door, having given the cot permanently to the girls, he noticed that she had moved her sleeping position, no longer placing herself between Kimmy and the rest of the room, but simply beside her sister. It was a small change, but significant. A fractional lowering of guard, a tentative extension of trust. Winter deepened, bringing storms that howled around the cabin corners and left snow piled against the walls. On clear days, Jackson taught the girls how to check his simple traps for rabbits, how to read weather signs in the sky, how to keep the goats from freezing in their lean-to. In the evenings, he began teaching them more structured English, using charcoal to draw simple pictures on scraps of paper, labeling them with words. Kimmy absorbed the lessons eagerly, while Nara applied herself with more deliberate determination. Jackson found himself drawing on vague memories of his own schooling, cobbling together lessons from fragments recalled from primer books and his mother's patient teaching before she died of fever when he was 12. In return, the girls began to teach him Apache words niutso for rain, ga for rabbit, tuo for grass. His pronunciation made Kimmy giggle, and even brought the rare ghost of a smile to Nara's serious face. These peaceful moments were punctuated by periods of stark reality. Twice that winter, riders passed near the cabin, once a small patrol of cavalry, once a group of hunters. Each time Jackson hustled the girls into the root cellar beneath the cabin floor, where they remained silent and still until the danger passed. After the second such incident, Nara approached him as he barred the door behind the departing riders. "Soldiers look for us," she asked, her English improving daily. Jackson considered lying, then decided against it. These children had seen too much to be protected by comforting falsehoods. "Maybe," he admitted, "or maybe just passing through." Nara nodded, absorbing this. "They kill our people, our village." It wasn't a question, but Jackson nodded anyway. "Yeah, you are soldier," she said, studying his face. "Before." Jackson felt the familiar twist in his gut. Shame, regret, the weight of complicity. "Yes, before." "You kill Apache." The directness of her question hit him like a physical blow. He could have evaded, could have softened the truth, but the steady gaze of this child demanded honesty. "Yes," he said quietly. "In battle. Never women or children." It was the truth, as far as it went. He had killed Apache warriors in combat. What he didn't say was that those battles had sometimes led to massacres afterward carried out by others while he stood by, not participating, but not stopping it either. Not until that final raid, he'd refused. Nara held his gaze for a long moment, then spoke again. "Why you help us?" It was the question he'd been asking himself since Takimi had died. The simplest answer was the life debt the promise made to a dying man. But there was more to it than that. A need for atonement, perhaps, or simply the recognition that these children deserved a chance at life that others like them had been denied. "Your father saved my life," he said finally. "And it was the right thing to do." Nara considered this, then nodded once, apparently satisfied. She turned to go, then paused. "My father was good man," she said. "You try to be good man too." It wasn't quite forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Coming from this solemn child who had lost everything, it felt like more than he deserved. "I'm trying," Jackson agreed softly. Spring came late to the high country, but when it arrived, it transformed the landscape with startling speed. The snow-covered slopes gave way to carpets of wildflowers, and the dry wash below the red ridge ran with snowmelt. The girls had been with Jackson for nearly 6 months now. They had weathered the winter together, learning each other's ways, building a fragile understanding that wasn't quite family, but was more than mere coexistence. Kimmy had blossomed with the warmer weather, ranging farther from the cabin each day, bringing back plants. She recognized some for eating, others for medicine, carefully teaching Jackson their uses. Nara remained more cautious, but had developed a quiet competence around the homestead, repairing tools with ingenious efficiency, trapping small game, even helping Jackson mend the goat pen when a late storm damaged it. Their English had improved remarkably, though they still spoke Apache between themselves. Jackson had learned enough of their language to understand simple conversations, though many nuances escaped him. With spring came decisions. Jackson knew the girls couldn't remain hidden forever. Eventually someone would discover them, or the cavalry would return in force. He considered options, moving farther into the wilderness perhaps, or trying to find their extended family among the remaining free Apache bands. The decision was taken from his hands one clear morning in May. Jackson was in the garden patch behind the cabin turning the soil for planting when he heard Kimmy's warning call, a perfect imitation of a Gambel's quail that they had established as a danger signal. He dropped the hoe and hurried around the cabin, gesturing for Kimmy to hide. 3 riders were approaching along the faint trail that led to his property, not military but civilians. One he recognized as Thomas Burke, who ran the general store in the small settlement 10 miles east. The others were strangers, hard-looking men with rifles across their saddles. Jackson stepped into view, wiping his hands on his trousers, trying to appear casual. "Morning," he called as they drew near. Burke reined in his horse, nodding curtly. "Hayes, been a while since you've been to town." "Winter was hard," Jackson replied. "Not much reason to make the trip." One of the other men, a weathered individual with a scar running from eye to jaw, leaned forward in his saddle. "Heard there was Indian trouble up this way. Seen anything?" Jackson kept his expression neutral. "Nothing recent. Why?" "Rancher lost some stock about 15 miles west," Burke supplied. "Found Apache tracks. Haven't seen any sign," Jackson said, careful to keep his tone even. "Been quiet here." The third rider, younger than the others but with cold eyes, surveyed the cabin and surrounding area. "Living all alone out here, Hayes, must get lonely." Something in the man's tone raised Jackson's hackles. "I manage." The scarred man spat into the dust. "Army patrol came through town yesterday. Said they're cleaning out the last Apache holdouts in these hills, offering bounty for information." Jackson felt ice form in his stomach. "That's so?" Burke nodded. $20 per head. More for warriors. The casual brutality of it lives reduced to dollar amounts reminded Jackson of why he'd left the army, why he'd chosen isolation over the company of men like these. "Well, if I see anything, I'll be sure to let someone know," he said, the lie bitter on his tongue. The younger rider's gaze lingered on the cabin. "Mind if we take a look around water, our horses at your spring?" Every instinct screamed danger. Jackson knew the girls were well hidden. They'd practiced for this, but any sign of hesitation would raise suspicion. "Spring's open to anyone passing through," he said with forced casualness. "But I'd appreciate if you'd stay clear of my garden patch. Just put in new seedlings." The men dismounted, leading their horses toward the spring behind the cabin. Jackson followed at a distance, his hand never far from the pistol at his hip. The scarred man wandered toward the goat pen, while Burke and the younger rider headed for the spring. Minutes stretched like hours as the men watered their horses, making comments about Jackson's poor excuse for a homestead and questioning how he survived out here alone. He answered evenly, volunteering nothing, until finally they seemed satisfied. As they mounted up to leave, the younger rider fixed Jackson with a penetrating stare. "You sure you haven't seen any Indians Hayes man could use that bounty money?" "I'm sure," Jackson replied, meeting his gaze steadily. The 3 riders departed, dust rising behind them as they took the trail back toward town. Jackson watched until they disappeared over the ridge, then hurried to the hollow oak where the girls had hidden themselves. "It's safe," he called softly. "They're gone." Nara emerged first, helping Kimmy out after her. Both girls were silent, their faces solemn. "They look for Apache," Nara said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Jackson confirmed. "But they won't find you here." Kimmy moved closer to her sister, taking her hand. "They kill us if they find—" The directness of the question from such a young child struck Jackson like a physical blow. He wanted to lie to protect her from such knowledge, but Nara was already nodding. "Yes," she said simply. "They kill. Jackson knelt to eye level with the girls. "I won't let that happen. I promised your father." Nara's dark eyes studied him. "Cannot promise. Too many soldiers. Too many men with guns." Her pragmatism was heartbreaking in its accuracy. Jackson couldn't guarantee their safety, not against the full force of the army or the hatred of settlers. "Then we'll be smarter," he said. "More careful. No fires during the day. No going far from the cabin. We'll wait until it's safe again." Kimmy looked up at her sister. "When safe?" Nara had no answer, and neither did Jackson. The truth was, it might never be safe for two Apache children in this territory, not in their lifetime. That night, as the girls slept on their pallet near the banked fire, Jackson sat in his chair by the door, pistol across his lap. He had made a promise to Takimi, and he intended to keep it. But Nara was right. He couldn't stand against an army. The thought that had been forming in the back of his mind for weeks now crystallized into decision. They would have to leave. Not immediately, but soon, before summer brought more patrols, more settlers, more chances of discovery. He would take the girls north, perhaps to the territories where fighting had subsided, where they might find safety among their own people, or even pass as Mexican children among the scattered settlements. It would mean abandoning the homestead, the only place that had felt like his own since the war. But looking at the sleeping forms of Nara and Kimmy, Jackson knew there was no real choice. These children had lost everything: their family, their home, their way of life. He wouldn't let them lose their futures too. Decision made, he began to plan. The next week passed in tense vigilance. Jackson worked on preparations for their journey, repairing his old pack saddle, drying meat for travel, teaching the girls which plants would be safe to eat along the way. He told them only that they might need to travel soon, not wanting to frighten them unnecessarily if another option presented itself. It was Kimi who discovered the grave. She had been gathering herbs near the edge of the property, staying within sight of the cabin as instructed. Jackson was mending a tear in his only spare shirt when she rushed in, eyes wide. "Jackson, come see!" She tugged at his hand insistently. He followed her to a small clearing behind the spring where the ground had been disturbed. Someone had dug a shallow pit and refilled it, placing rocks in a rough circle around the site. "Bad men bury something," Kimmy said, pointing to boot prints still visible in the softer earth. Jackson felt a chill. The riders who had visited, they must have hidden something while watering their horses at the spring. Something they didn't want found. "Stay back," he told Kimmy, drawing his knife to probe the disturbed soil. It didn't take long to uncover it, a bundle wrapped in a blood-stained blanket. Jackson's stomach knotted as he folded back the fabric to reveal the face of a young Apache warrior no older than 20. His eyes still open in death, a bullet hole centered in his forehead. Execution style. No battle wound. Kimmy gasped behind him, and Jackson turned to find both girls standing there, Nara having joined them silently. He moved to block their view, but it was too late. "I told you to stay back," he said to Kimmy, his voice sharper than intended. Nara stepped forward, her face a mask of controlled grief. "We know death," she said simply. "Who is he?" Jackson shook his head. "I don't know. One of your people." "They kill him, hide him here," Nara said, comprehension dawning. "Make trouble for you." Jackson nodded grimly. The implications were clear. The riders had murdered this young man for the bounty, then hidden the body on Jackson's property. If it were discovered, he would be blamed. At best, he'd be driven off his land. At worst, hanged for murder. "We need to bury him properly," Jackson said. "Then we need to leave. Tonight." Nara nodded, her decision made in an instant. Yes, not safe here now. As they prepared to rebury the young warrior, Kimi knelt beside the body. To Jackson's surprise, she began to sing softly a low melodic chant in Apache. Nara joined her, their voices twining together in the still afternoon air. Jackson stood back, giving them space for this ritual. When the song ended, Nara looked up at him. "He was indeed Apache," she said. "Like us, his spirit needs help to find the way." They buried the young man deeper this time in a proper grave that wouldn't be easily discovered. Jackson marked it with a small cairn of stones, and Kimi placed a sprig of sage on top. As they walked back to the cabin, Nara spoke quietly. "Men who did this will come back. Watch to see if you find body." "I know," Jackson agreed. "That's why we need to leave quickly." They packed only what they could carry: food, a change of clothes for each of them, Jackson's pistol and rifle, the few tools that would be essential. Into Jackson's tobacco tin went the beaded strip Takimi had given him, the small wooden bird Nara had offered that first night, and a lock of Kimi's hair she insisted on adding, "So we stay together." As darkness fell, Jackson took one last look around the cabin that had been his home for 3 years. It wasn't much, but he had built it with his own hands, had believed it would be his final resting place when his time came. "Ready?" he asked the girls, who stood by the door, small bundles on their backs. Nara nodded, her face resolute. Kimi looked less certain, but took her sister's hand firmly. Jackson extinguished the lamp and closed the door behind them without bothering to latch it. They wouldn't be coming back. They moved north under the cover of darkness, following game trails rather than established roads. Jackson led the way, Nara bringing up the rear with Kimi between them. The girls moved with remarkable silence, their Apache upbringing evident in every careful step. By dawn, they had covered nearly 10 miles, putting good distance between themselves and the cabin. They made camp in a sheltered ravine, eating cold rations rather than risking a fire. As Kimi dozed against her sister's shoulder, Nara looked at Jackson with clear-eyed assessment. "Where we go?" she asked quietly. "North," Jackson replied. "To Colorado territory. I have a cousin there who might help us." It was a half-truth. He did have a cousin in Colorado, but they hadn't spoken in years, not since Jackson had joined the army against the family's Quaker beliefs. Whether Elias would help them was far from certain. Nara seemed to sense his uncertainty. "Long journey. Dangerous." "Yes," Jackson admitted. "But staying was more dangerous." She nodded, accepting this logic. "We sleep now. Travel at night again." As Nara settled beside her sister, Jackson took first watch, his rifle across his knees. The enormity of what they were undertaking pressed on him: 2 Apache children and a disgraced former soldier fleeing across hostile territory with little more than determination and desperate hope. But looking at the sleeping girls, Jackson felt a fierce certainty rise within him. Whatever came, he would protect them. It was a promise made not just to Takimi now, but to himself. They traveled for 3 weeks, moving mostly at night, avoiding settlements and patrol routes. The journey was grueling for all of them, but the girls showed remarkable resilience. They never complained of hunger or fatigue, though Jackson knew they suffered both. Kimi fell ill once, a fever that kept them camped for 3 days in a hidden glen while Jackson and Nara gathered herbs to treat her. The delay cost them precious time and supplies, but there was no question of pressing on until she recovered. They had one close call with a cavalry patrol hiding in a thicket of juniper as the soldiers passed within 50 yards of their position. Kimi had trembled silently against Jackson's chest, his hand gentle but firm over her mouth to ensure no sound escaped. The soldiers had moved on, unaware of how close they had come to their quarry. As they crossed into Colorado territory, the landscape changed, more forested with higher mountains and deeper valleys. Game was more plentiful, and Jackson was able to supplement their dwindling supplies with fresh meat. It was late June when they reached the foothills where Jackson's cousin had established a small sawmill. They observed from a distance, first watching the comings and goings for a full day, before Jackson felt confident enough to approach. "Wait here," he told the girls, concealing them in a dense thicket near a stream. "If I'm not back by nightfall, head north and east. Follow the river." Nara nodded, her face serious. "We wait until stars come. Then we go." Jackson walked the last mile alone, rehearsing what he would say to Elias, a man he hadn't seen in 8 years. How to explain 2 Apache children. How much of the truth to tell? The sawmill was just as Jackson remembered it. A sturdy wooden structure beside a fast-flowing stream with a modest cabin nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the rhythmic sound of the water-driven saw filled the air. A man emerged from the cabin, taller than Jackson, with the same sandy hair but a fuller beard. Elias Hayes had aged lines creasing the corners of his eyes, but his posture remained straight, his movements deliberate. He spotted Jackson from a distance, shading his eyes against the afternoon sun. Recognition came slowly, then a visible stiffening of his shoulders. "Jackson!" he called, voice carrying over the saw's drone. "That really... you!" Jackson approached, hands visible, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. "Hello, Elias. Been a long time." Elias didn't move to greet him, maintaining his position on the cabin porch. 8 years, 4 months, he said precisely. "Not since you signed up to kill Indians for the government." The Quaker bluntness hadn't changed. Jackson had expected no less. "I'm not with the Army anymore," he said. "Haven't been for 3 years." "What brings you here, then? Last I heard you had a place down in Arizona." "I need help, Elias. Not just for me." Something in Jackson's tone must have conveyed the urgency, for Elias's expression shifted slightly. "What kind of help?" Jackson took a deep breath. "I have 2 children with me, girls. They need a safe place." Elias's brow furrowed. "Your children?" "No, Apache." The word hung between them. Elias's face remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. "You'd better come inside," he said finally, "and explain yourself." Inside the cabin, which was larger than it appeared from outside, Jackson told a version of the truth, how he'd found the girls orphaned, how he'd cared for them through the winter, how they'd had to flee when danger threatened. He omitted Takimi, the life debt, his own complicity in the war against the Apache. Some truths were too complicated for this moment. Elias listened without interruption, his hands folded on the table between them. When Jackson finished, silence stretched between them. "You're asking me to harbor Indian children," Elias said finally, "in violation of government policy that says they should be in a reservation school. I'm asking you to help 2 innocent girls who have lost everything," Jackson countered. "Our parents raised us to believe in compassion, Elias, in doing what's right, not what's legal." Elias's mouth tightened. "Don't speak to me of our parents' teachings. You abandoned them when you took up arms." The rebuke stung partly because it contained truth. Jackson had disappointed his family deeply with his choice to join the Army. "Perhaps I did," he admitted, "but I'm trying to honor them now. These girls deserve a chance at life." Elias stood pacing the length of the cabin. "If they're found here, I could lose everything. The mill, my standing in the community." "I know it's a risk," Jackson acknowledged. "I wouldn't ask if there were any other way." Elias stopped pacing, fixing Jackson with a penetrating gaze. "These girls, they matter to you." Jackson thought of Nara's fierce protectiveness, Kimmy's quiet resilience, the trust they had placed in him despite everything. "Yes," he said simply. "They do." Elias seemed to reach some internal decision. "Bring them here. They can stay until we figure out something more permanent. But there will be rules, Jackson. Strict ones." Leaf washed through Jackson. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was sanctuary, at least for now. "Thank you," he said, meaning it. "We'll abide by whatever rules you set." As he rose to fetch the girls, Elias stopped him with a hand on his arm. "One question," his cousin said. Why risk everything for two Apache children? After all you must have seen and done in the war." Jackson could have given many answers: duty to Takimi, atonement for past wrongs, basic human decency. But looking into his cousin's searching gaze, only one truth seemed to matter. "Because they needed me," he said. "And maybe I needed them, too." Elias nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. "Go get them before dark falls. There are wolves in these hills." Jackson stepped out into the fading light, moving quickly back toward where he'd left Nara and Kimmy. For the first time in weeks, he felt a cautious hope unfurl within him. Perhaps here, with Elias's help, the girls might find safety, perhaps even a future. But as he approached the thicket where they waited, a sense of wrongness prickled at the back of his neck. The forest was too quiet, the birds silent. "Narakimi," he called softly, then louder when no answer came. The thicket was empty. The small packs the girls had carried were gone, along with all signs of their presence. Only a small object remained, placed deliberately on a flat stone, the wooden bird carving Nara had given him months ago. Jackson picked it up, turning it in his fingers as dread settled in his stomach. They had fled. But why he had told them to wait until nightfall if he didn't return? Unless they had seen something. Or someone. A twig snapped behind him. Jackson spun, hand dropping to his pistol, to find Elias standing there, rifle held loosely but ready. "They're gone," Jackson said, confusion and fear making his voice rough. Elias scanned the surrounding forest. "You're sure this is where you left them?" "Yes, something must have spooked them." Jackson examined the ground, finding faint tracks leading away from the thicket, small footprints heading not north as he had instructed, but east, deeper into the mountains. "I need to find them," he said, already gathering his pack. "They won't survive alone in this country." Elias hesitated, then shouldered his rifle. "I'll help you look." "But Jackson, what? If they ran, they had a reason. Are you sure they want to be found?" The question hit Jackson like a physical blow. Had he misunderstood so completely? Had the girls merely been using him as an escort to safer territory, planning all along to leave once they reached Colorado Numb? He remembered Kimmy's small hand in his during the journey, Nara's fierce protectiveness that had gradually extended to include him. Whatever had happened, it wasn't a planned abandonment. "Something scared them off," he insisted. "Help me find their trail before dark." They tracked the girls until nightfall made it impossible to continue. The footprints led steadily eastward, sometimes joined by drag marks, where one had apparently helped the other. They were moving with purpose, not panic, heading somewhere specific. As they made camp for the night, Elias built a small fire, while Jackson stared eastward into the darkness, willing himself to see through the miles to where Nara and Kimmy might be. "We'll find them tomorrow," Elias said with more gentleness than he had shown earlier. Jackson nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. The mountains were vast, and two small girls could disappear into them like smoke. "I made a promise," he said more to himself than to Elias. "To their father." to keep them safe. Elias looked up sharply. Their father, you said they were orphans. Jackson realized his slip too late. The story was unraveling already. He died, he said after a moment, but not before asking me to protect his daughters. And how did you come to make this promise? Elias pressed. There's more to this story than you've told me, brother. Perhaps it was exhaustion, or the weight of weeks of vigilance, or simply the need to share the burden with someone. Whatever the reason, Jackson found himself telling Elias everything. Takimi finding him wounded the life debt the promise made to a dying man, his own history with the Apache campaigns. When he finished, Elias was silent for a long time, staring into the fire. So you took these children in, not out of charity, he said finally, but to repay a debt. At first, Jackson admitted, but it became more than that. And now you've lost them, Elias observed without judgment. I'll find them, Jackson insisted. Whatever it takes. Elias studied him across the fire, the flames casting his features in sharp relief. You've changed Jackson. The brother I knew would never have risked his life for 2 Indian children. The brother you knew died somewhere in Arizona, Jackson said quietly, along with a lot of other men. And for what? So settlers could take land that wasn't theirs to begin with. Elias's eyebrows rose at this unexpected philosophy. Sounds almost Quaker, coming from you. Maybe our parents were right about some things, Jackson conceded. Just took me too long to see it. They fell silent, each lost in thought. As the fire burned down to embers, Jackson took out the wooden bird, turning it over in his fingers. The carving seemed to catch the fading light, the wings almost moving in the flickering shadows. We'll find them, Elias said again with more conviction this time. Get some rest. We start at first light. Jackson tucked the bird away and settled onto his bedroll, though he doubted sleep would come. Somewhere in these mountains, 2 children who had come to mean everything to him were alone, possibly in danger. The thought was almost unbearable. He closed his eyes, picturing Nara's serious face, Kimmy's rare smile. Wait for me, he whispered into the darkness. I'm coming. Dawn broke clear and cold. Jackson was already up, having slept fitfully at best. They ate a quick breakfast of jerky and hard biscuits, then resumed tracking. The girls' trail led steadily eastward, following a game path that wound through increasingly rugged terrain. By midday, they had reached a series of rocky outcroppings that made tracking difficult. They're heading for the high country, Elias observed, pointing to a distant ridgeline. Question is, why? Jackson shook his head. Unless, a thought struck him. Nara once mentioned other Apache who had escaped the reservations, said they were hiding in mountains to the east. Could be, Elias agreed. The army doesn't patrol much up here. Too difficult for horses. They pressed on, losing the trail occasionally on rocky ground, but picking it up again in softer soil. Late in the afternoon, they found signs of a campsite, a small, carefully constructed fire pit, cold now but recently used. They stopped here last night, Elias said, examining the ashes. Not more than 12 hours ago. Hope surged in Jackson. They were close. As they continued, the path narrowed, skirting a steep drop to a valley below. Jackson moved carefully, aware that one misstep could mean disaster. Elias followed, equally cautious. They rounded a bend to find the path blocked by a rock slide, recent the dust still settling. Beyond it, the trail continued, but reaching it would require climbing over unstable boulders. The girls couldn't have crossed this, Jackson said, surveying the obstacle. It must have happened after they passed. Or they caused it, Elias suggested, to cover their trail. The thought hadn't occurred to Jackson. Would Nara deliberately create such an obstacle? It seemed excessive for children, but then these were no ordinary children. "We'll have to find another way around," he decided, studying the terrain. Elias pointed to a narrow ledge that skirted the rock slide. "There. It's tight, but we can make it." The ledge was indeed narrow, barely wide enough for a man to edge along sideways, with a sheer drop of several hundred feet on the outer side. Jackson went first, pressing his back against the rock face, moving inch by cautious inch. Halfway across, a section of the ledge crumbled beneath his foot. Jackson lurched, catching himself on a protruding rock, as loose stones clattered down the cliff face. "Easy," Elias called from behind. "Take it slow." Jackson steadied himself, heart pounding, and continued more carefully. When he reached the other side, he turned to watch Elias make the crossing. His cousin was nearly to safety when a voice rang out, clear, commanding, speaking Apache. Jackson spun to find Nara standing on the path ahead, a small bow drawn and aimed directly at his chest. Behind her, partially hidden behind a boulder, was Kimmy. "Nara," Jackson said, relief flooding through him. "Thank God you're safe." Nara's expression didn't change. The bow remained steady in her hands. "You bring soldier," she said in English, nodding toward Elias, who had just reached solid ground. "To take us." Understanding dawned. The girls had seen Elias with his rifle and assumed he was military coming to capture them. "No," Jackson said quickly. "This is my cousin Elias. He's helping me find you. He's not a soldier." Nara's gaze flicked to Elias, skeptical. "He has gun." "For protection," Elias said carefully, keeping his hands visible. "These mountains can be dangerous." Kimmy peered out from behind her boulder. "You promised safe place," she said to Jackson, her voice small but clear. "But man has gun like soldiers." "Many people have guns in these territories," Jackson explained gently, "for hunting for protection. It doesn't make them soldiers." Nara's bow hadn't wavered. "Why you bring him? We trust you only." The simple statement, "we trust you," hit Jackson with unexpected force. Despite everything, despite their flight, the girls had trusted him. "I brought him because he can help us," Jackson said. "His home is safe. No one will look for you there." Nara and Kimmy exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Nara lowered the bow slightly. "Show beads," she demanded, "from father." Jackson reached slowly into his pocket and withdrew the tobacco tin. Opening it, he removed the beaded strip Takimi had given him. "I keep it safe," he said, holding it up. "Always." Something in Nara's posture relaxed, though the bow remained half-raised. "Girl there," she said, suddenly pointing with her chin toward the valley below. "Apache girl. Hurt bad. Need help." Jackson and Elias both turned to look where she indicated. In the distance, almost hidden among the trees, a thin column of smoke rose from what might be a campfire. "Another girl?" Jackson asked, confused. "From your village," Nara nodded. "We find her yesterday. Soldiers hurt her. She dies soon without help." The situation clarified. The girls hadn't been running away from Jackson. They'd been running toward someone who needed help. "We can help her," Jackson said immediately. "Elias has a wagon at his cabin. We can bring her there." Nara studied him intently, measuring his sincerity. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her, for she finally lowered the bow completely. "She hurt very bad," she said soberly. "Maybe die anyway." "We'll try," Jackson promised. "Show us where she is." Kimmy emerged fully from behind her boulder, moving to stand beside her sister. She looked at Elias with wary curiosity. "You Jackson's brother?" she asked. "Cousin," Elias corrected gently. "But we grew up as brothers." This seemed to reassure her. She took Nara's hand, and together they led the way down a steep path toward the valley below. As they descended, Nara explained in halting English what had happened. They had been waiting for Jackson when they spotted a group of cavalry soldiers in the distance heading toward the sawmill. Fearing capture, they had fled eastward, following paths, Nara remembered, from stories told by elders about mountain refuges. Yesterday, they had found the girl, maybe 14 years old, badly beaten and left for dead by soldiers who had attacked a small group of Apache moving through the area. The others had been killed or captured, but this girl had crawled into hiding. "She speak little," Nara said. "Too weak, but say name Layla." The camp, when they reached it, was well hidden in a grove of pines. The girl lay on a bed of boughs covered with Kimi's blanket. Her face was swollen almost beyond recognition, one arm bent at an unnatural angle. Jackson knelt beside her, his experience with battlefield wounds telling him immediately that her chances were poor. Internal bleeding, broken bones exposure, anyone could be fatal, and she had suffered all three. Layla's eyes fluttered open at his approach. Fear flashed across her face, and she tried to scramble away. "Nara," Jackson called softly. "Tell her we're here to help." Nara knelt beside the girl, speaking gentle words in Apache. Layla responded weakly, her voice barely audible. "She think you soldiers," Nara translated, "come to finish killing." "Tell her we're friends," Jackson said. "We'll take her somewhere safe." As Nara conveyed this, Elias examined the girl's injuries with a practiced eye. "She needs a doctor," he said quietly to Jackson. "And quickly." "Nearest doctor is in town," Jackson replied equally low. 2 days' journey. She won't make it." "My neighbor's wife was a nurse during the war," Elias said. "It's closer than town. If we can get the girl to my cabin, I can fetch Sarah." It was their best hope. Carefully, they constructed a travois from branches and blankets, making it as comfortable as possible for Layla. The journey back would be slow and painful for her, but they had no choice. As they prepared to leave, Kimi approached Jackson, holding out her small hand. In it lay the wooden bird carving. "You dropped," she said. "Important to keep." Jackson accepted it, touched by her concern for something he had thought lost. "Thank you, Kimi. It is important. You gave it to me, remember?" She nodded solemnly. "To remember, promise." The simple words carried a weight beyond their apparent meaning. A promise to protect, to care for, to stand between these children and a world that wished them harm. A promise Jackson now extended to include Layla, another child caught in the machinery of conquest. "I remember," he assured her, tucking the bird safely away. "Always." As they began the arduous journey back to Elias's cabin, Jackson found himself thinking of Takimi. Was this what the dying man had foreseen when he asked a former enemy to protect his daughters? Not just survival, but a chance to help others to begin healing wounds that ran soul deep. Jackson couldn't know. But with Nara and Kimi walking beside him and Elias leading the way, he felt for the first time that he might be on the right path, not just keeping a promise, but finding redemption he hadn't known he was seeking. The sun was setting behind the mountains as they made their slow way back, casting long shadows across the land. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The journey back to Elias's cabin was slow and arduous. The travois carrying Layla bounced and jostled despite their best efforts to keep it steady, drawing pained gasps from the injured girl. Nara walked beside her, speaking soft words in Apache, while Kimi gathered herbs along the path that might ease Layla's suffering. Dusk was falling when they finally reached the clearing where the sawmill stood. Elias hurried ahead to prepare a place for Layla, leaving Jackson and the girls to follow with the travois. "Almost there," Jackson assured Layla, though he wasn't certain she could hear him. Her breathing had grown increasingly labored over the past hour, her skin hot with fever. Elias met them at the cabin door, face grim. "Bring her inside. I've prepared a bed." The interior of the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, with a main room dominated by a stone fireplace and two smaller rooms beyond. Elias had cleared a space near the fire, laying out clean blankets on a pallet. They transferred Layla as gently as possible, but even the slight movement drew a whimper from her cracked lips. Up close in the firelight, her injuries looked even worse, face swollen and discolored, arm clearly broken, and dried blood matting her hair where she'd taken a blow to the head. "I'll go for Sarah," Elias said, already moving toward the door. "Her farm is 3 miles west. She has medical training from the war." Jackson nodded, grateful. "We'll do what we can until you return." As Elias departed, Nara and Kimmy set to work with quiet efficiency. Kimmy crushed herbs she had gathered, mixing them with water to form a poultice, while Nara carefully washed Layla's wounds with warm water from the kettle. Jackson watched them work, struck by the contrast between their child-sized hands and the adult competence with which they moved. Neither girl had hesitated when faced with Layla's injuries. They simply did what needed doing, as they had been taught. "Can I help?" he asked, feeling strangely useless. Nara glanced up. "Need clean cloth for bandages." Jackson found an old shirt in his pack and tore it into strips, handing them to Nara. She wrapped Layla's wounds with practiced care, including a makeshift splint for the broken arm fashioned from small branches and cloth. Kimmy approached with her herbal mixture. "For fever," she explained, placing some on Layla's forehead and neck. "And pain." They worked in silence for a time, doing what they could for the injured girl. When everything possible had been done, Jackson stoked the fire while Nara sat vigilant beside Layla, one small hand resting on the older girl's arm. "Will she live?" Kimmy asked quietly, coming to stand beside Jackson. He wanted to offer reassurance, but the gravity of Layla's condition made false comfort seem cruel. "I don't know," he admitted. "She's very badly hurt." Kimmy nodded, accepting this honest assessment. "Sometimes spirit decides to go," she said with simple wisdom, "not because we didn't try." Jackson looked down at her, struck again by the maturity these children had been forced to develop. "Yes," he agreed softly, "but we'll help her fight if she wants to stay." They waited together as the night deepened, keeping watch over Layla, whose breathing grew more labored with each passing hour. Twice she woke briefly, eyes wild with fever and fear, until Nara spoke to her in Apache, calming her enough to swallow a few sips of water before lapsing back into unconsciousness. It was well past midnight when hoofbeats announced Elias's return. He entered the cabin accompanied by a woman in her 40s, her graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, her movements brisk and purposeful. "This is Sarah Cooper," Elias introduced her. She was a nurse with the Union Army. Sarah nodded briefly to Jackson, then moved immediately to Layla's side, her expression hardening as she took in the extent of the injuries. She knelt, setting down a leather bag of medical supplies. "How long has she been like this?" she asked, already examining Layla with practiced hands. "We found her yesterday," Jackson replied. "She was attacked by soldiers, according to the girls." Sarah's mouth tightened at this, but she made no comment. Instead, she opened her bag and began removing instruments and medicines. "I need hot water, clean cloths, and good light," she instructed, "and the children should wait outside." Nara rose to her full height, which barely reached Sarah's shoulder. "We stay," she said firmly. "Help." Sarah assessed the girl with a quick glance. "You've been caring for her?" Nara nodded. "Yes, make medicine. Clean wounds." "Very well. but stay out of my way unless I ask for help." Sarah turned to Jackson. "You and Elias, bring the lamp closer. I need to see what I'm dealing with." For the next hour, Sarah worked methodically on Layla's injuries. She reset the broken arm, cleaned and stitched a deep gash on the girl's shoulder, and applied salves to the worst of the bruising. Through it all, Layla remained mercifully unconscious, stirring only when the pain became too intense, even for her fevered state. "The head injury concerns me most," Sarah said, finally washing blood from her hands in a basin. "There's swelling beneath the skull. If it doesn't subside—" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. "What can we do?" Jackson asked. "Keep her cool. Try to get water into her when she wakes. Beyond that—" Sarah shook her head. "I've seen men die from less severe blows, but I've also seen them survive against all odds." She packed her supplies, then turned to Nara and Kimmy, who had watched the entire procedure with solemn attention. "Your herbal treatments were well chosen," she told them, her tone softer now. "Continue with the fever poultice. It seems to be helping." Nara nodded, a flicker of pride crossing her usually stoic features. As Sarah prepared to leave, she drew Jackson and Elias aside. "That girl was not just beaten," she said in a low voice. "She was violated, repeatedly." Jackson's stomach clenched. "Soldiers did this." "From the nature of the injuries, yes. Military boots leave distinctive bruises." Sarah's eyes were hard as flint. "I treated too many similar cases during the war to mistake it." "Will she recover?" Elias asked. "Physically, perhaps, with time and care. The other wounds—" Sarah shook her head. "Those never fully heal." After she had gone, promising to return the next day, a heavy silence settled over the cabin. Layla lay quiet now, the worst of her external wounds cleaned and bandaged, but the gravity of Sarah's parting words hung in the air. Nara resumed her position beside Layla, while Kimmy curled up nearby, exhaustion finally claiming her. Jackson and Elias sat at the rough table, speaking in low voices. "What happens now?" Elias asked. "Even if she survives, there are 3 Apache children in your care. The army is still hunting their people. Sooner or later, someone will discover them." Jackson had been turning this problem over in his mind for hours. "We need somewhere safer than here," he said. "Somewhere they won't be found." "The Quaker settlement in the north might take them in," Elias suggested. "Our people don't believe in the government's Indian policies." It was a possibility, but a distant one. The settlement was hundreds of miles away, and Layla wouldn't survive such a journey in her current condition. "First, we need to get her well enough to travel," Jackson said. "Then we'll decide." Elias nodded, accepting this practical approach. "You can stay here as long as needed. The cabin's isolated enough that few visitors come by." Jackson studied his cousin, noting the changes in him since they'd last met. Elias had always been the steady one, the brother who remained true to their parents' pacifist beliefs, while Jackson had rebelled, seeking adventure and purpose in the army. "Thank you," Jackson said simply, "for everything." Elias shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. "It's what our parents would have done. Still, not everyone would risk helping Apache children, especially now." "Perhaps not." Elias glanced toward Nara, still maintaining her vigil. "But they're children first, Apache second. At least to me." It was a perspective Jackson had come to share, though it had taken him longer to reach it. He wondered what their parents would think of him, now the son who had rejected their teachings, only to find his way back to them through an unexpected path. Near dawn, Layla's condition worsened. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, her skin burning with fever despite the cooling poultices. Nara called out softly, drawing Jackson and Elias to the bedside. "She dying?" Nara said, her voice steady, but her eyes reflecting fear. Spirit leaving. Jackson knelt beside them, feeling helpless in the face of injuries beyond his ability to heal. What can we do? Sing journey song, Nara replied. Help spirit find way. She began a low, melodic chant, her young voice carrying the ancient tones with surprising strength. Kimmy, waking at the sound, joined her sister, their voices twining together in harmony. Jackson and Elias stood back, bearing witness to this ritual of passage. The song continued for nearly an hour, rising and falling like the wind through pine branches, until Layla drew one final shuddering breath, and then was still. Silence fell, broken only by the soft crackle of the fire. Nara reached out and gently closed Layla's eyes. "She free now," she said quietly. "No more pain." Kimmy began to weep silently, tears tracking down her dusty cheeks. Jackson moved to comfort her, but Nara shook her head. "Tears good," she explained. "Help spirit know she loved." It was Elias who finally spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "We should bury her properly, with respect." Nara nodded agreement. "In high place, where sun finds her first." They wrapped Layla's body in clean blankets, binding her broken arm across her chest. Elias fetched a shovel, and together they carried her to a small rise overlooking the valley where the morning sun indeed touched first. The digging was hard work in the rocky soil, but no one complained. When the grave was ready, they laid Layla to rest with the few possessions she had carried: a small pouch of stones and seeds, a bone comb, and a fragment of mirror wrapped in leather. Nara and Kimmy sang again, a different song this time, slower, more rhythmic. When they finished, Nara explained that it was a blessing song to guide Layla to her ancestors. "Do you want to say anything?" Jackson asked Elias, who had stood silent throughout the ceremony. His cousin hesitated, then spoke simply. "May she find the peace in death that was denied her in life." It was a fitting epitaph for a young girl whose brief existence had been shadowed by violence and loss. As they filled in the grave and marked it with stones, Jackson felt a renewed determination. Layla's fate would not be shared by Nara and Kimmy, not while he had breath in his body. They returned to the cabin in somber silence. Elias prepared a simple breakfast while Jackson helped the girls wash away the dirt and tears of the morning's task. No one spoke much. There seemed little to say in the face of such sorrow. It was Kimmy who finally broke the stillness, approaching Jackson as he sat cleaning his rifle. "Layla, tell something," she said, her voice small but steady. "Before die, about soldiers." Jackson set aside the rifle, giving her his full attention. "What did she tell you?" "Soldiers looking for Apache children. Take to school far away." Kimmy's eyes were wide with fear. "Take from families. Never come back." The Indian boarding schools. Jackson had heard of them, government institutions where native children were sent to be civilized, their language and culture systematically erased. "Was that why they attacked Layla's group?" he asked gently. Kimmy nodded. "Looking for children. Layla run. Others caught or killed." The implications were chilling. If the army was actively searching for Apache children to place in these schools, Nara and Kimmy were in even greater danger than he had realized. "Did Layla say where these soldiers were based?" "Which fort?" "Fort near river," Kimmy replied. "Where mountains meet plains." Jackson exchanged a glance with Elias, who had been listening from across the room. "Fort Lyon," Elias said grimly. "It's about 60 miles east of here. Too close for comfort. If patrols from Fort Lyon were operating in this area, they needed to be extremely cautious." "We'll need to stay hidden," Jackson told Kimmy. "All of us. No going far from the cabin for a while." She nodded, accepting this restriction without complaint. "They take us to school if they find—" Jackson wanted to reassure her, but false promises would be cruel. They might try, he admitted, but I won't let them. Promise. Kimmy's gaze was direct, trusting despite all she had endured. I promise, Jackson said firmly. You and Nara will stay together and with me as long as you want to. It was a dangerous pledge in a world where the odds were stacked against them, but Jackson meant every word. Whatever it took, he would keep these children safe from soldiers, from government policies, from a system bent on destroying their way of life. Kimmy seemed satisfied with his answer. She returned to where Nara sat near the fire, the two girls speaking quietly in Apache, their heads close together. Elias approached, keeping his voice low. You realize what you're promising. The army doesn't give up easily. If they're under orders to collect Indian children for these schools. I know, Jackson acknowledged. But what's the alternative? Send them to one of these places to have everything that makes them who they are stripped away. Elias sighed, running a hand through his beard. No, I wouldn't wish that on any child. He glanced toward the girls. But they can't stay here indefinitely. It's too exposed, too close to Fort Lyon. Then we'll move on, Jackson said. When it's safe. Find somewhere more remote. And you'll go with them. Elias's gaze was searching. Give up any chance of a normal life. Jackson hadn't thought that far ahead, but the answer came without hesitation. Yes, if that's what it takes. His cousin studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You really have changed, Jackson. Before Jackson could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning quiet. Elias moved quickly to the window, peering out cautiously. Army patrol, he reported, his voice tight. 4 men, coming this way. Jackson's heart raced. The girls, the root cellar, Elias said, already moving. Quickly! Jackson ushered Nara and Kimmy toward a trapdoor in the corner of the cabin concealed beneath a rug. The space below was small and dark, used for storing preserves and root vegetables through the winter. Stay absolutely silent, he instructed as they climbed down. No matter what you hear, understand. Both girls nodded, their faces grave but composed. They had hidden from soldiers before. I'll come for you when it's safe, Jackson promised, then closed the trap door and replaced the rug just as the sound of hoofbeats reached the cabin yard. Elias opened the door before the soldiers could knock, his manner deliberately casual. Morning, gentlemen.
What brings the army out this way? The patrol leader, a lieutenant with a sun-weathered face and cold eyes, dismounted. Routine patrol, sir. Checking isolated homesteads. There's been Indian activity reported in the area. Haven't seen any Indians, Elias replied evenly. Just me and my cousin here working the sawmill. The lieutenant's gaze shifted to Jackson, assessing. Your cousin, Jackson Hayes. Jackson introduced himself, stepping forward. Just arrived from Arizona Territory. Arizona? The lieutenant's interest sharpened. Lot of Apache trouble down there, I hear. Jackson shrugged. Some. I kept to myself, mostly. Mind if we have a look around? The question was phrased as a request, but the lieutenant's tone made it clear it wasn't one. Elias hesitated, then stepped aside. Help yourselves. Not much to see. The 4 soldiers entered the cabin, eyes scanning every corner. Jackson forced himself to appear relaxed, though he was acutely aware of the trapdoor just feet away, concealed only by a thin rug. What's your business here, Hayes? The lieutenant asked, running a gloved hand along the mantelpiece. Long way from Arizona. Family, Jackson replied simply. Elias is my only living kin. Thought I'd try my hand at the lumber business for a change.
The lieutenant nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. He gestured to one of his men. "Check the outbuildings, Jenkins. Thompson, take the perimeter." As two soldiers departed to follow these orders, the lieutenant continued his inspection of the cabin opening cupboards, peering into the small bedrooms. "Heard about that Apache girl they found," he said casually, watching for their reaction. "Terrible business." Jackson kept his expression neutral, though his pulse quickened. "What Apache girl?" "Some of our boys found a dead Indian girl up in the hills 2 days ago. Been attacked by something mountain lion, probably." The lie was delivered smoothly without a flicker of conscience. "Shame. She was just a young thing." Elias shook his head, the picture of sympathetic ignorance. "Nature can be cruel out here." "Indeed." The lieutenant paused near the fireplace, examining the fresh ashes. "You've had a fire going recently. Bit warm for that, isn't it?" "Nights are still cold this high up," Elias replied, "and we needed hot water for washing." The lieutenant made a non-committal sound, then moved toward the corner where the trapdoor lay hidden. Jackson's muscles tensed, ready to intervene if necessary, but what action he could take against 4 armed soldiers he wasn't sure. Just then, one of the men returned from outside. "Lieutenant, tracks up on that rise behind the cabin. Fresh ones." The lieutenant turned, interest rekindled. "What kind of tracks?" "Small. Could be children, or maybe just deer." Jackson's throat went dry. Layla's grave. They'd buried her that morning, and the disturbed earth and footprints would still be clearly visible. "Show me," the lieutenant ordered, already moving toward the door. As the soldiers filed out, Elias caught Jackson's eye, a silent message passing between them. "Prepare for trouble." Jackson waited until they were out of sight, then quickly lifted the rug and opened the trap door. Nara and Kimmy looked up at him, faces pale in the dim light. "We may need to leave," he whispered. "Be ready." He closed the trapdoor again just as boots sounded on the porch. The lieutenant re-entered his manner entirely, changed, hard suspicious, his hand resting on his pistol. "Want to explain that fresh grave up there, Hayes? The one with Indian burial markers? There was no point denying it." "A girl," Jackson admitted. "She was injured. We tried to save her, but she died during the night." "And how did this injured Apache girl come to be in your care?" "We found her in the hills," Elias interjected. "Couldn't just leave her to die." The lieutenant's eyes narrowed. "You should have reported it immediately. Harboring hostiles is a serious offense." "She wasn't a hostile," Jackson said, anger rising despite his effort to remain calm. "She was a child, beaten half to death and left to die." A dangerous silence followed this statement. The lieutenant's jaw tightened. "You making accusations, Hayes?" "Just stating facts," Jackson replied, meeting the man's gaze steadily. "The girl had boot marks on her body, military boots." The lieutenant's hand moved to his pistol grip. "Careful what you're implying, civilian." Elias stepped between them, hands raised placatingly. "No one's implying anything, Lieutenant. We simply did what any Christian would do for a dying child. Nothing more." The tense moment stretched the lieutenant, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he turned to his remaining man. "Search the cabin, thoroughly." The soldier moved methodically through the space, checking every potential hiding place. Jackson stood rigid, aware of Elias doing the same beside him. If the soldier found the trap door... He reached the corner where it lay, hidden boot heels thudding on the wooden floor. He paused, seeming to notice something, then bent down to examine the rug. In that moment, Jackson made his decision. If the soldier found the girls, there would be no peaceful resolution. He would have to act, even if it meant violence, even if it meant his own life. His hand moved slowly toward the knife at his belt, hidden beneath his shirt. Beside him, he sensed, rather than saw, Elias tense, preparing for whatever came next. The soldier lifted the edge of the rug, revealing the outline of the trapdoor. He looked up at the lieutenant, who nodded grimly. "Open it," the officer ordered. The soldier grasped the iron ring and pulled. The trapdoor swung up, revealing the dark space below. Jackson's hand closed around his knife hilt, ready to draw. But the cellar was empty. Potatoes, jars of preserves, a barrel of apples, but no sign of Nara or Kimi. Relief warred with confusion in Jackson's mind. Where had they gone? How had they disappeared from a space with no other exit? The soldier peered into the darkness, then shrugged. "Nothing, sir. Just storage." The lieutenant frowned, clearly disappointed. "Check again." The soldier climbed down into the cellar, moving jars and barrels, searching every corner. Finally, he climbed back out, shaking his head. "Nothing, Lieutenant. Just food stores." The officer's suspicion hadn't abated, but without evidence, he had little reason to prolong the search. "Very well." He turned back to Jackson and Elias. "I'll be filing a report about the dead Apache girl. Expect questions from Fort Lyon. In the future, gentlemen, any contact with hostiles, living or dead, is to be reported immediately." "Understood." "Understood, Lieutenant," Elias replied evenly. With a final sweeping glance around the cabin, the officer departed, his remaining men following. They mounted their horses and rode out, dust rising behind them as they took the trail back toward the fort. Jackson waited until they were well out of sight before allowing himself to breathe normally again. "Where are they?" he asked Elias urgently. The cellar was empty. Elias moved to the trapdoor, lifting it again. "Nara Kimi. It's safe now." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, incredibly, a section of the cellar wall seemed to shift. A small panel, expertly disguised to match the surrounding dirt, slid aside, and Nara emerged from a space beyond, followed by Kimi. "False wall," Elias explained as the girls climbed up into the cabin. "Built it during the war, when we were helping runaway slaves on the Underground Railroad." Jackson stared amazed at the ingenuity of the hiding place. "You never mentioned this." "Never needed to," Elias replied simply. "Until now." Nara dusted herself off her face grave. "Soldiers looking for us." "Yes," Jackson confirmed. "But they didn't find you." "They come back," she stated with certainty. "Not safe here now." She was right, of course. The lieutenant's suspicions had been aroused. He would return perhaps with more men, perhaps with a proper search warrant. The cabin was no longer a safe haven. "We need to leave," Jackson agreed, looking to Elias. "Tonight, if possible." His cousin nodded, already moving to gather supplies. "I've been thinking about this. There's an old trapper's cabin up in the high country about 20 miles north. Hardly anyone knows it exists. You could hole up there until things calm down." It was their best option. Remote enough to avoid discovery, but not so far that they couldn't make it in a day's hard travel. "We'll need supplies," Jackson said, mentally cataloging what they would require. "Food, blankets, ammunition." "I'll provide what I can," Elias assured him. "And I'll check on you when possible." Nara had been listening intently, her dark eyes moving between the men. "Why you help us?" she asked Elias suddenly. "Not your children, not your people." Elias paused in his preparations, considering the question seriously. "My parents taught me that all people are God's children," he said finally, "and that we have a duty to help those in need regardless of where they come from." Nara absorbed this, her expression thoughtful. "Your God says help enemies. Yes, Elias confirmed. To love your enemies actually, though I don't consider you enemies. Hard teaching, Nara observed. Good, but hard. The best teachings usually are, Elias agreed with a small smile. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for departure. Elias gathered supplies while Jackson checked and cleaned his weapons. The girls sorted through the herbs Kimmy had collected, selecting those that would be most useful for the journey. As dusk approached, Elias saddled his mule and loaded it with provisions, flour, coffee, salt, jerky ammunition, and tools they might need. The animal could navigate the steep mountain trails more surely than a horse, and its smaller size would leave less obvious tracks. "You're sure about this?" Elias asked Jackson quietly as they worked. "Taking on 2 Apache children, living as a fugitive. It's not the future I imagined for you." Jackson checked the cinch on the mule's pack, considering his answer. "Nor I," he admitted, "but sometimes the path chooses you, not the other way around." Elias nodded, accepting this. "Mother would say it's providence." "Maybe she'd be right." Jackson extended his hand. "Thank you, Elias, for everything." His cousin clasped his hand firmly. "You're still my brother Jackson, despite our differences." It was as close to a reconciliation as they had come in years. Jackson felt something settle within him, a piece of his past finding its proper place. As full darkness fell, they prepared for departure. The girls wore boys' clothing. Elias had provided trousers, shirts, and caps that would help them blend in if seen from a distance. Jackson dressed similarly in nondescript work clothes, with his rifle slung across his back and pistol at his hip. "Remember," Elias instructed, "follow the North Star until you reach the split rock, then take the game trail west. The cabin is in a grove of aspens near a small lake. It's well hidden. You could pass within 50 yards and not see it." Jackson committed the directions to memory. "We'll find it." Elias handed him a rough map drawn on a piece of leather. "Just in case. And this." He pressed a small Bible into Jackson's hand. It was Mother's. The gesture touched Jackson deeply. Their mother's Bible had been Elias's most prized possession since her death. "I can't take this," he protested. "You need it more than I do," Elias insisted. "Besides, she'd want you to have it. Especially now." Jackson accepted the book, tucking it carefully into his pack. "I'll treasure it." They set out under a moonless sky, the only light coming from the stars overhead. Jackson led the mule with Nara and Kimmy, following close behind. They moved silently through the forest, avoiding the main trails, heading steadily northward. The girls showed no fear of the darkness, their Apache upbringing having taught them to move confidently through the night. They traveled for hours without speaking, the only sounds the soft footfalls of the mule and the distant cry of a night bird. Near midnight, they paused to rest in a small clearing. Jackson distributed jerky and water, watching as the girls ate with the careful efficiency he had come to recognize, never wasting a crumb, never taking more than needed. "How much farther?" Kimmy asked, her voice little more than a whisper. "Several hours," Jackson replied. "We should reach the cabin by dawn if we keep moving." Nara had been scanning the forest, her head tilted slightly, as if listening for something beyond human hearing. "Someone follows," she said suddenly. Jackson tensed, hand moving to his rifle. "Soldiers," she shook her head. "Not soldiers. One person. On foot. Far behind, but following." Jackson strained his ears, but could detect nothing unusual in the night sounds. Yet he had learned to trust Nara's senses, which seemed almost supernaturally acute at times. "How far back?" "Maybe 1 hour," she estimated. "Walking quiet, but not Apache quiet." Not a tracker from the fort, then, who would have brought others and moved more openly. A lone pursuer suggested something else, perhaps a bounty hunter or someone with a personal interest. We need to move, Jackson decided. Change direction, try to lose them. They packed quickly and set out again, now heading northeast, instead of due north. Jackson led them through a rocky stream bed where they would leave no tracks, then up a steep slope that would be difficult to follow in darkness. For an hour they pushed on at a grueling pace until Kimmy began to stumble with exhaustion. Jackson lifted her onto the mule where she clung to the pack, half dozing as they continued. Dawn was breaking when they reached the split rock Elias had described, a massive boulder cleaved down the middle by some ancient force creating a narrow passage. Beyond it, just as promised, lay a game trail winding westward through dense forest. Not much farther now, Jackson encouraged, though he too was feeling the effects of the night's hard travel. Nara, who had been ranging slightly behind them as rear guard, appeared silently at his side. "Still follows," she reported, her face grim. "Closer now." Jackson considered their options. They could try to increase their pace, but the mule was already tiring, and the trail ahead grew steeper. Or they could stand and confront whoever pursued them. "How many?" he asked. "One," Nara confirmed. "Man has gun." A difficult decision. If they continued to flee, they risked leading their pursuer directly to the cabin that was meant to be their sanctuary. But confrontation might mean violence with the girls at risk. "We'll set an ambush," Jackson decided. "Up ahead where the trail narrows between those boulders. Nara, take Kimmy and the mule and continue to the cabin. I'll deal with our shadow." Nara shook her head firmly. "I stay. Help." "It's too dangerous," Jackson argued. "If something happens to me, you need to be with Kimmy." "I good with bow," she insisted, pulling the small weapon from her pack. "Can shoot from trees, not seen." Jackson hesitated, weighing the risks. Nara was indeed skilled with the bow. He had seen her bring down rabbits with unerring accuracy, and having someone positioned above would give them a tactical advantage. "All right," he conceded. "But at the first sign of serious trouble you run. Promise me." Nara nodded, though something in her eyes suggested she had no intention of abandoning him regardless of the danger. They quickly formed a plan. Kimmy would continue with the mule following the trail to the cabin. Nara would climb a pine tree overlooking the narrow passage bow ready. Jackson would wait behind one of the boulders, prepared to confront their pursuer directly. As Kimmy disappeared around a bend in the trail, leading the reluctant mule, Nara scaled the pine with the agility of a squirrel, positioning herself on a branch 20 feet above the ground, partially concealed by needles. Jackson took his position behind the largest boulder, rifle ready, but hoping he wouldn't need to use it. Killing their pursuer would only bring more attention, more searchers. Better to warn them off, if possible. They didn't have long to wait. Within 20 minutes, the sound of cautious footsteps reached Jackson's ears. Someone approaching, slowly, trying to move quietly, but lacking the skill to be truly silent in the forest. Jackson tensed, finger near the trigger guard of his rifle. The footsteps drew closer, paused, then continued more slowly, as if the pursuer sensed the trap. A shadow fell across the trail, a tall figure moving with deliberate care, rifle held ready. As the person reached the narrowest point between the boulders, Jackson stepped out, his own weapon leveled. "That's far enough," he said firmly. "State your business." The figure froze, then slowly lowered its rifle. To Jackson's shock, the pursuer pushed back a hat to reveal not a man's face, but a woman's, Sarah Cooper, the nurse who had treated Layla. "I mean, you no harm, Mr. Hayes," she said calmly, despite the rifle pointed at her chest. "I've come to help." Jackson didn't lower his weapon. "You followed us all night. Why?" Because soldiers came to my farm after leaving Elias's place, Sarah explained, asking questions about an Apache girl. I knew you'd have to flee, and I knew you'd need help. From above, Nara's voice called down, "She tells truth!" Sarah glanced up, spotting the girl in the tree with her bow drawn. A faint smile touched her lips. Clever position. Jackson studied the woman carefully. Sarah Cooper had helped them once, already treating Layla without judgment or prejudice. But following them into the wilderness was another matter entirely. "How did you find our trail?" he asked, still suspicious. "I was a nurse in the war, Mr. Hayes. I followed many a wounded soldier through worse terrain than this." Her expression softened slightly. "And I have my own reasons for helping Indian children." Something in her tone suggested a personal connection. Jackson lowered his rifle slightly. "What reasons?" Sarah hesitated, then spoke quietly. "My sister married a Cherokee man before the war. They had 2 children. When the fighting reached Indian territory, soldiers came to their farm. They killed my brother-in-law and took the children to one of those schools." Her voice hardened. "My sister never saw them again. She died, still searching." The story rang with painful truth. Jackson finally lowered his rifle completely. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said simply, "but I still don't understand why you'd risk yourself for us." "Because I couldn't help my sister's children," Sarah replied. "But perhaps I can help these." She glanced up at Nara again. "Besides the younger one, Kimmy has a gift for healing. I recognized it when she was preparing those herbs for Layla. Such gifts shouldn't be wasted in some government school where they'll beat her for speaking her own language." Jackson looked up at Nara, who still maintained her position in the tree bough half-drawn. "What do you think?" he called to her. "Can we trust her?" Nara studied Sarah intently, then slowly lowered her bow. "She helped Layla," she said finally. "Good hands, good heart." It was as close to an endorsement as Nara was likely to give a stranger. Jackson nodded, accepting her judgment. "All right, Mrs. Cooper. You can come with us. But the cabin we're heading to is small and supplies are limited." "I brought my own," Sarah responded, indicating a pack on her back. "And I don't need much space, just a corner to lay my bedroll." With the matter settled, Nara descended from the tree with remarkable speed. She approached Sarah, studying her with frank curiosity. "You know healing?" she asked. Sarah nodded. "Some. From the war and from my grandmother, who was a midwife." "I show you Apache healing," Nara offered. "You show me your..." It was the most forthcoming Jackson had ever seen her with a stranger. Sarah seemed to recognize the significance of the offer, for she inclined her head respectfully. "I would be honored to learn from you, Nara." They continued along the trail now, 3 instead of 2, moving at a quicker pace with the sun to light their way. Sarah kept up easily despite her age, showing no signs of fatigue from the night's journey. "How is Kimi managing?" she asked as they walked. "The journey must be hard for one so young." "She's stronger than looks," Nara replied with evident pride. "Apache children learn early to be strong." "Indeed they do," Sarah agreed. "My niece was about her age when—" She trailed off, the memory clearly painful. "What happened to your sister's children?" Jackson asked after a respectful pause. Sarah's face tightened. "The boy died at the school. Pneumonia, they said, but my sister always believed it was from beatings. The girl ran away when she was 14. No one ever found her." A ghost of hope flickered across her features. "I like to think she made it to safety somewhere. Found others of her people." The conversation fell into silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts as they followed the winding trail higher into the mountains. By mid-morning, they reached a small plateau overlooking a crystalline lake. A grove of aspens shimmered in the breeze, their white trunks stark against the deep green of the surrounding pines. "The cabin should be here somewhere," Jackson said, scanning the area. It was Nara who spotted it first, a small structure so well integrated into the landscape that it seemed almost to grow from the earth itself. Built partly into a hillside with a sod roof now sprouting grasses and wildflowers, it was nearly invisible until you were almost upon it. As they approached, the door opened to reveal Kimmy, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "You found it," she called. "Come see." The cabin was indeed small, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and shelves stocked with basic provisions left by previous occupants. But it was solid, defensible, and hidden from casual discovery. Kimmy had already started a small fire in the fireplace and was heating water in a battered kettle. "For tea," she explained proudly, "found herbs outside." Sarah set down her pack and looked around with an appraising eye. "Snug," she commented, "but it will serve. And the location is excellent. Good view of the approach's water nearby, plenty of game in these woods from the tracks I saw." Jackson felt some of the tension of the past days begin to ease. They had made it. Not to permanent safety, perhaps, but to a respite, a place to gather strength and plan their next move. As Kimmy served tea in mismatched cups found on the shelves, the four of them sat around the rough table, an unlikely group united by circumstance and choice, a former soldier seeking redemption, a war nurse haunted by family tragedy, and two Apache children orphaned by the very conflict that had shaped the adults' lives. "What now?" Nara asked, her direct gaze meeting Jackson's across the table. It was the question that had been hovering at the edges of his mind throughout their flight. What came next? They couldn't hide in these mountains forever. Winter would come harsh and unforgiving at this altitude, and even if they survived until spring, what then? A lifetime of running, of looking over their shoulders. "We rest," Jackson said finally. "Recover our strength, then we consider our options." Sarah nodded approval. Wise. No good decisions come from exhaustion. Nara seemed less satisfied with this answer, but she didn't press. Instead, she turned to Kimmy, speaking quickly in Apache. The younger girl nodded and disappeared outside, returning moments later with a handful of plants. "For healing," Nara explained to Sarah. "I show now." As the two began an impromptu lesson in herbal medicine, Jackson stepped outside, needing a moment alone to clear his head. The mountain air was crisp and clean, the view from the plateau stretching for miles across forest and valley. He thought of Takemi, the man who had set him on this path with a simple request: "Protect my daughters." Had he fulfilled that promise? They were alive, yes, and for now, safe. But what kind of future could he offer them in a world so determined to erase their existence? The answer, when it came, was both simple and profound. He could offer them choice. The freedom to decide their own path, to preserve their heritage, to live according to their own values, rather than those imposed by force. It wasn't much, perhaps, in the face of all they had lost. But it was something. A beginning, not an end. With renewed purpose, Jackson returned to the cabin. Inside, he found a scene of surprising domesticity. Sarah and Nara bent over a collection of herbs at the table, Kimmy sweeping the floor with a makeshift broom. "We'll need more firewood before nightfall," he announced. "And I should check the perimeter, make sure we're truly alone up here." "I help," Nara offered immediately, setting aside the herbs. "Good eyes." Jackson nodded, grateful for her assistance. Together they stepped out into the afternoon light, two unlikely allies bound by circumstances neither could have imagined just months before. As they moved through the forest surrounding the cabin, Jackson found himself wondering what Takemi would think of the situation, his daughters far from their homeland living with a former enemy, hunted by the very government that claimed to bring civilization to the territories. Would he approve of Jackson's choices, or would he regret entrusting his precious children to a man whose people had caused so much suffering? Questions without answers. But as Nara moved silently beside him, her keen eyes missing nothing, Jackson felt a quiet certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as guardian and wards, but as a family forged in adversity, bound by something stronger than blood. The path ahead remained uncertain, fraught with danger and difficulty. But for the first time since Takemi had placed his dying trust in a former soldier's hands, Jackson felt equal to the challenge. Life at the hidden cabin settled into a careful routine over the next few weeks. The early summer days were filled with practical tasks, gathering food, reinforcing the cabin's walls, establishing a watch schedule to ensure they weren't surprised by unwelcome visitors. Each person found their role naturally. Jackson handled hunting and security. Sarah tended to medical needs and cooking, while Nara and Kimi foraged for herbs and edible plants, their knowledge of the natural world proving invaluable. The cabin itself, though small, provided adequate shelter. Jackson and Sarah had built a lean-to extension using branches and canvas, creating separate sleeping areas that afforded everyone a measure of privacy. Inside, the main room served as kitchen dining area and classroom, for Sarah had taken it upon herself to teach the girls to read. "Knowledge is protection," she told them when Nara initially resisted the lessons. "The more you understand of the white man's ways, the better you can protect yourselves." This practical approach resonated with Nara, who approached reading with the same determined focus she brought to all challenges. Kimi, naturally curious, took to it even more readily, soon poring over the few books they possessed, Sarah's medical text, Jackson's mother's Bible, and a tattered almanac left by a previous occupant. On this particular morning, Jackson stood at the edge of the plateau, scanning the valley below through a battered spyglass. It had become his habit to check the approaches several times daily, alert for any sign of soldiers or trackers. So far, they had remained undiscovered, but he knew better than to grow complacent. Movement at the tree line caught his attention, a flash of color where there should be only green and brown. He focused, the spyglass tension easing when he recognized the forms of Nara and Kimi returning from their morning foraging, plant-filled baskets balanced on their hips. In just a few weeks, both girls had changed noticeably. Regular meals and safety had filled out their once gaunt frames. Kimi smiled more often, sometimes even laughing when something amused her. Nara remained more reserved, but the perpetual wariness in her eyes had softened, at least when they were alone at the cabin. Jackson lowered the spyglass, reflecting on how naturally they had formed a kind of family unit. Not conventional by any measure, but bound by something perhaps stronger than blood choice, mutual protection, shared purpose. As the girls approached, Kimi waved excitedly. "Jackson, we found mushrooms, the good kind." "Careful," Nara admonished her sister. "Voice carries in mountains." Kimi immediately lowered her volume, though her enthusiasm remained undimmed. "Sorry, but look." She held up her basket, revealing a cluster of golden chanterelles. "Well done," Jackson said, genuinely impressed. "Sarah will know how to prepare them." They walked together back to the cabin, where Sarah was hanging freshly washed clothing on a line strung between two aspens. She looked up as they approached, pushing a strand of gray hair back beneath her kerchief. "Successful morning, I see," she observed, eyeing the full baskets. "Kimi found chanterelles," Nara reported, allowing a hint of pride in her voice. "And I found more yarrow for medicine supplies." Sarah nodded approval. "Excellent. The yarrow tincture is almost gone." Inside the cabin, they sorted the morning's findings: edible plants in one pile, medicinal in another. As they worked, Sarah mentioned casually, "I should make a trip into town soon. We're running low on flour and salt." Jackson looked up sharply. "It's too dangerous. If someone recognizes you—" "I'm just an old woman buying supplies," Sarah countered. "No one will think twice about it. Besides, we need information as much as provisions. Has the search been called off? Are patrols still active in the area? We can't make decisions without knowing the situation." Her logic was sound, but Jackson still hesitated. Their safety depended on absolute secrecy, and any contact with the outside world carried risk. "I'll go," he decided. "I can travel faster alone, and you're far more likely to be remembered," Sarah interrupted. "A stranger asking questions draws attention. I've lived in this region for years. My presence won't raise eyebrows." They argued the point over lunch, dried venison and wild greens, until Nara finally spoke up. "She right," she said simply. "Sarah, less danger. People trust old woman." Kimmy nodded agreement. "Sarah smart. Careful." Outvoted Jackson reluctantly conceded. 2 days, he stipulated. "If you're not back in 2 days, I'm coming after you." Sarah's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Fair enough. I'll leave at dawn tomorrow." The decision made, they turned to other matters. Jackson and Nara spent the afternoon setting snares in the surrounding forest, while Sarah taught Kimmy more about treating common ailments using their growing store of medicinal herbs. That evening, as they sat around the fire after a simple supper, Kimmy asked the question that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks. "When we leave here, where we go?" The cabin fell silent, the crackling fire suddenly loud in the stillness. It was the question they had all avoided: what came next? Where safety might lie? Whether there was any place in this vast country where 2 Apache children could live without fear? Sarah looked to Jackson, deferring to him on this matter. Nara watched him intently, waiting for his answer. "I've been thinking about that," Jackson admitted. "There are a few possibilities. The Quaker settlement Elias mentioned is one option. They might take us in at least for a while." "How far?" Nara asked practically. "Several hundred miles. A difficult journey, especially as winter approaches." "What other choices?" Nara pressed. Jackson hesitated, then shared the idea that had been forming in his mind. "There are remote areas in the mountains further west. Places so isolated even the army doesn't patrol them. We could build a permanent home there, live off the land." "Just us," Kimmy's voice held a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "Yes, or—" Jackson glanced at Sarah. "Whoever chooses to come." Sarah's weathered face creased in a genuine smile. "I've lived alone long enough. If you'll have an old woman along, I'd welcome the company." Nara considered this option, her expression thoughtful. "Hard life. Cold winters. But free." "Yes," Jackson agreed. "Freedom has its price." They discussed the possibilities late into the evening, weighing risks against benefits, practicalities against dreams. No final decision was reached, but something had shifted. They were no longer simply hiding, waiting. They were planning for a future. As they prepared for sleep, Nara approached Jackson, where he sat checking his rifle by the dying fire. "Thank you," she said quietly. Jackson looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For keeping promise. To our father." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "For becoming family." The simple statement touched him deeply. "You and Kimmy are my family now," he replied. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Nara nodded, a rare smile briefly illuminating her serious face. "Together," she agreed, then turned away to join Kimmy in their sleeping area. Jackson remained by the fire a while longer, turning Nara's words over in his mind. Family. It was a concept he had abandoned years ago when he left for the war against his parents' wishes. Now it had found him again, in the most unexpected way, through two Apache children and a strong-willed nurse bound together by circumstance and choice. Whatever tomorrow brought, that bond gave him strength. Sarah departed at first light, dressed in her plainest dress and bonnet, a basket over one arm, as if she were simply going marketing. Jackson walked with her to the edge of the forest, where a faint trail led down toward the nearest settlement, a small mining town called Prospect. "Remember 2 days," he reminded her. "Be careful what you ask, and who you ask it of." Sarah gave him a look that managed to be both fond and exasperated. "I survived a war, Mr. Hayes. I think I can manage a trip to town." "Just come back safe," he said more awkwardly than he intended. Her expression softened. "I will. Take care of the girls." With that, she set off down the trail, her sturdy figure soon lost among the trees. Jackson watched until she was out of sight, then returned to the cabin, trying to shake off a nagging sense of foreboding. The day passed slowly. Jackson took Nara hunting, teaching her to use his pistol when she expressed interest in firearms. She proved a quick study, her natural steadiness and keen eye making her a promising shot. "Different from Bo," she commented, after successfully hitting a target he had set up. "Louder, faster, and more dangerous," Jackson cautioned. "A gun can kill at distances a bow can't reach. That's why you need to be absolutely certain of your target before you fire." Nara nodded, taking the lesson seriously. Like many white man things, powerful but dangerous. It was an astute observation. Jackson found himself impressed, not for the first time, by her intelligence and perception. Back at the cabin, they found Kimi engrossed in the Bible, sounding out words with careful concentration. She looked up as they entered, excited to show off her progress. "Listen," she said, and read haltingly but correctly from the Psalms, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." "Very good," Jackson praised, genuinely impressed by how quickly she was learning. Kimi beamed with pride. "Sarah says I have good mind for letters." "She right," Nara agreed, ruffling her sister's hair affectionately. "Always were smartest in village." The sisters shared a smile, one of those moments of connection that seemed to transcend their current circumstances, reaching back to memories of a life now lost to them. That night, as Kimi slept and Nara kept first watch, Jackson found himself unable to rest. Sarah's absence left a gap in their small group, a reminder of how vulnerable they were. If something happened to her in town, if she were recognized or questioned too closely, their sanctuary could be compromised. He paced the cabin quietly, checking the rifle for the third time, peering out the small window at the moonlit clearing. Nara watched him from her post by the door. "Worried for Sarah," she observed. It wasn't a question. Jackson nodded. "She should be fine, but world dangerous for those who help Apache," Nara finished. "We know." Her calm acceptance of this reality, that simply by existing she and her sister brought danger to those around them, struck Jackson as profoundly unfair. These children had done nothing to deserve such a burden. "It's not right," he said, voicing the thought aloud. "None of this is right." Nara studied him in the dim light. "World not fair," she said simply. "Apache know this long time. Now you learn too." There was no bitterness in her tone, just a mature acceptance that Jackson found both admirable and heartbreaking. At her age, he had been running wild with his cousins, protected by loving parents, his greatest concern whether he would finish his chores in time to go fishing. "Get sleep," Nara advised, practical as always. "I wake you for next watch." Jackson nodded, knowing she was right. Worry wouldn't bring Sarah back any sooner, and he needed to be rested in case action was required tomorrow. As he settled onto his bedroll, he found himself thinking of Takimi. Would the Apache warrior approve of how Jackson was raising his daughters? He was teaching them the white man's ways, reading English, even firearms. Was that a betrayal of their heritage, or a necessary adaptation to a changing world? These troubled thoughts followed him into uneasy dreams, where Takimi stood just beyond reach, watching with inscrutable eyes, as Jackson tried to explain choices he himself wasn't certain were right. Dawn brought no sign of Sarah, which was expected. She wouldn't have reached town until late yesterday, and the return journey would take most of a day. Still, tension hung over the cabin as they went about their morning tasks. Jackson checked and rechecked their supplies, mentally preparing for the possibility that they might need to leave quickly if Sarah didn't return, or worse, if she returned with pursuers on her trail. Nara seemed to sense his unease, for she stuck close to the cabin rather than ranging out to forage as usual. Kimmy, less attuned to the undercurrents of adult concern, continued her reading practice, occasionally asking Jackson to help with a difficult word. By midday, Jackson's restlessness had reached a peak. He announced his intention to scout the trail Sarah would use to return, promising to be back before sunset. "You stay here," he instructed Nara. "Keep the door barred, and don't open it for anyone but Sarah or me." Nara nodded, her hand resting near the pistol he had left for her. "We be careful." Jackson set out, moving quietly through the forest, alert for any sign of Sarah, or more worryingly, strangers in the area. The trail wound down through increasingly dense trees, following a small stream that eventually joined a larger creek near the valley floor. He had gone perhaps 3 miles when he heard voices ahead, men's voices rough with exertion as they climbed the trail he was descending. Jackson immediately melted into the underbrush, positioning himself behind a fallen log where he could observe without being seen. 3 men came into view, working their way up the steep path. 2 wore the unmistakable blue uniforms of cavalry soldiers, rifles slung across their backs. The third was dressed in civilian clothes, a tall man with a weathered face and the confident stride of someone accustomed to the wilderness. A tracker, Jackson realized with a cold certainty. The soldiers had hired a local guide to help them search the mountains. He remained motionless as they passed his hiding place, straining to hear their conversation. "Waste of time," one soldier was saying. "If there were Apache up here, we'd have found sign by now." The tracker spat into the underbrush. "There's sign, all right. You just don't know how to read it. Those herbs by the creek weren't harvested by deer." "So some trapper's been foraging," the second soldier argued. "Doesn't mean it's our runaways." "Maybe," the tracker conceded. "But that woman in town asking about patrols, that's suspicious." Jackson's heart sank. Sarah. They had to be talking about Sarah. "Old woman buying supplies," the first soldier scoffed. "Thompson's jumping at shadows again." "Thompson's got a nose for trouble," the tracker countered, "and he says she asked too many questions." The men moved out of earshot, continuing up the trail that would take them within a mile of the cabin. Jackson remained hidden, mind racing. If they were searching this area because of Sarah's inquiries, where was she now? Had she been detained, or was she taking a different route back to avoid being followed? He needed to warn Nara and Kimmy, then find Sarah. But moving now would risk being spotted by the patrol. He forced himself to wait until the men were well ahead, before backtracking and taking a roundabout path that would bring him to the cabin from the opposite direction. The journey took longer than he'd anticipated, the need for stealth slowing his progress. By the time he reached the clearing, shadows were lengthening across the plateau. The cabin appeared undisturbed, smoke rising normally from the chimney. He approached cautiously, whistling the signal he and Nara had established to identify himself. The door opened immediately, revealing Nara with the pistol held ready at her side. Her expression shifted from alertness to relief when she saw him. "Soldiers," Jackson said without preamble as he entered. "3 of them heading this way. A patrol with a tracker." Nara's face tightened. "Sarah?" "No sign of her. But they mentioned a woman in town asking questions. It has to be her." Kimmy had come to stand beside her sister, eyes wide with concern. "They hurt Sarah." "I don't know," Jackson admitted. "But we need to be ready to move. Pack only what's essential." As the girls gathered their few possessions, Jackson quickly assessed their options. The soldiers were approaching from the east, following the most direct trail from town. If Sarah was still free, she would likely approach from the same direction, potentially walking straight into the patrol. "We need to warn her," he decided. "And we can't stay here. The tracker will find this place by morning, if not sooner." Nara nodded agreement. "Where we go?" It was the critical question. Moving deeper into the mountains meant harsher conditions and dwindling supplies. Heading toward any settlement increased the risk of discovery. "North," Jackson decided. "There's a pass that leads to a different valley. It's rough country, but the tracker might not follow us through it." They worked quickly, packing food, ammunition, and essential tools. Jackson made sure the Bible was carefully wrapped and placed in his own pack. Whatever else was lost, that connection to his past would be preserved. As they prepared to leave, a sound outside froze them in place. Footsteps approaching rapidly, too light for a man's tread. Jackson motioned the girls back, raising his rifle. But before he could position himself, the door burst open. Sarah stood in the doorway, breathing hard, her dress torn and muddy, a wild look in her eyes. "Thank God," she gasped, seeing them all safe. "We have to leave. Now. They're coming." Jackson helped her inside, barring the door behind her. "Soldiers. I saw them on the trail." "What happened?" Sarah sank onto a chair, accepting the water Kimmy offered. "I was careful," she said between gulps. "But there was a new lieutenant in town, Thompson, sharp-eyed and suspicious. He started questioning me after I bought supplies." She grimaced. "I think he recognized me from when they came to Elias's cabin that day." "Did they follow you?" Jackson asked urgently. "Not directly. I took precautions, doubled back several times. But they were organizing a patrol as I left town, and I heard them mention this area specifically." It confirmed Jackson's worst fears. They had perhaps an hour, maybe less, before the soldiers and their tracker reached the cabin. "We're already packed," he told Sarah. "Can you travel? You look exhausted." She straightened steel, entering her spine. "I've walked further in worse condition, Mr. Hayes. Don't worry about me." Her resilience was remarkable, but Jackson could see the fatigue beneath her determined exterior. Still, they had no choice. Night was falling, and they needed to use the darkness to their advantage. "We're heading for the North Pass," he explained, helping her to her feet. "If we can cross it by morning, we might lose them in the next valley." Sarah nodded, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a folded paper. "Before we go, I found this posted in town. You need to see it." Jackson unfolded the paper, a wanted notice with crude drawings of 2 Apache children and a man matching his own description. The text described them as dangerous fugitives and offered a substantial reward for their capture, dead or alive. "Dead or alive," he read aloud, anger rising in his throat. "They're children, for God's sake." "The Army doesn't see it that way," Sarah said grimly. "To them, they're just Indians who need to be controlled. And you're a traitor for helping them." Nara took the notice from Jackson's hands, studying it with an expression that mixed fear and determination. "They never stop looking," she said quietly. "No," Jackson agreed. which means we can never stop running. The reality of their situation settled over them like a physical weight. This wasn't just a temporary flight. It was a life sentence. Always moving, always hiding, always looking over their shoulders. Unless we find somewhere they won't follow, Sarah suggested, somewhere beyond their reach. "Where is that?" Jackson asked, frustration evident in his voice. "The army's everywhere." "Not everywhere," Sarah corrected. "Not in Mexico. Not in the territories still controlled by free tribes." It was a desperate suggestion, but not without merit. The border was hundreds of miles south, but if they could reach it, they might find safety beyond the jurisdiction of the U.S. Army. "Mexico," Nara repeated, testing the word. "Apache there, too. Some bands," Sarah confirmed. "In the Sierra Madre Mountains. They've never been conquered." Hope flickered briefly in Nara's eyes, the possibility of rejoining her people, of living according to the traditions that had been so violently interrupted. "It's a long journey," Jackson cautioned. "Dangerous, and we'd need to survive the winter first." "One step at time," Nara said practically. "First, escape soldiers." Her focus on the immediate challenge brought them all back to the urgent matter at hand. Discussion of Mexico could wait. First, they needed to evade the patrol closing in on them. They extinguished the fire, gathered their packs, and slipped out the cabin's back window, rather than using the door, which might leave more obvious tracks. Moving in single file with Jackson leading and Sarah bringing up the rear, they headed north through the darkening forest. The route to the pass was steep and treacherous, especially in the growing darkness. They relied on the half-moon's light filtering through the trees, each step carefully placed to avoid snapping branches or dislodging stones that might give away their passage. Kimmy stumbled once, a small cry escaping her before she caught herself. They all froze, listening intently, but no answering sound came from behind them. After a tense moment, they continued moving even more cautiously. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when Jackson raised his hand, signaling a halt. In the stillness, they heard it, voices carried on the night breeze coming from the direction of the cabin. "They found it," he whispered. "We need to move faster." Abandoning some of their caution for speed, they pushed on through the darkness, climbing steadily toward the pass that loomed as a darker shadow against the night sky. The trail grew steeper, forcing them to use hands as well as feet on the rougher sections. Sarah was struggling, her earlier exhaustion evident in her labored breathing, but she waved off Jackson's offer of assistance. "Keep going," she urged between breaths. "I'll manage." They reached a small plateau just below the pass and paused to catch their breath. From this vantage point, they could see down to where the cabin stood, now illuminated by torches as the soldiers searched the area. The sight was sobering. Their sanctuary was compromised, their new life there ended before it had truly begun. "They'll find our trail soon," Jackson said, gauging the distance between the search party and their current position. "We need to reach the pass before dawn." They pressed on the path, growing increasingly difficult, as it wound between massive boulders and along narrow ledges. Twice they were forced to backtrack, when the way forward proved impassable in the darkness. It was Nara who eventually found the route through her keen night vision, guiding them where Jackson's failed. She moved with the sure-footedness of a mountain goat, reaching back to help Kimmy over the more challenging sections. As they neared the top of the pass, the wind intensified, cutting through their clothing with icy fingers. The trees had thinned, offering less protection from the elements, but better visibility in the moonlight. Jackson called another halt, needing to assess their position. The pass was just ahead, a narrow gap between two towering peaks. Beyond it lay unknown territory he had never crossed to the northern valley himself, knowing it only from trappers' tales. "Rest a moment," he told the others, noting Sarah's pallor and Kimi's drooping shoulders. "We're almost there." They huddled in the lee of a large boulder, sharing jerky and water, gathering strength for the final push. Sarah leaned heavily against the rock, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. "I'm slowing you down," she said quietly to Jackson. "If they catch up, they won't," he interrupted firmly. "We stay together." She smiled faintly at his determination. "You're a good man, Jackson Hayes. Better than you give yourself credit for." Before he could respond, Nara tensed beside him, her head lifting like a deer sensing danger. "Someone coming," she whispered. "From below." They listened, and now they all heard it, the faint sound of boots on stone, the occasional clink of equipment. The soldiers were on their trail and moving fast. "Go!" Sarah urged, struggling to her feet. "I'll delay them." "No," Jackson said sharply. "I told you we stay together." "Be practical," she countered. "I can't move quickly enough, but I can buy you time." She reached for the pistol at his belt. "Give me this. Go with the girls. Get them to safety." Jackson hesitated, torn between the practical truth of her words and his unwillingness to abandon her. Nara spoke up unexpectedly. "She right," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear Jackson could see in her eyes. "Need time to cross paths. Sarah, brave woman. Good fighter." The assessment delivered with such adult conviction from a child struck Jackson forcefully. Nara understood sacrifice. It was woven into the fabric of her young life. "I'm not leaving you to die," he told Sarah firmly. "Who said anything about dying?" Sarah retorted with a flash of her usual spirit. "I intend to give them a good chase, then surrender when I'm ready. They won't harm an old woman." They both knew it wasn't that simple. Harboring fugitives, especially Apache children, could mean serious charges. But Sarah's mind was clearly made up. "Take this," Jackson said, removing his mother's Bible from his pack and pressing it into her hands. "Keep it safe for me." Sarah understood the gesture for what it was, not just a practical request, but a promise that he intended to see her again. "I will," she assured him, tucking the book into her own pack. "Now go before they get any closer." Jackson embraced her briefly, then turned to the girls. "Stay close to me. Move as quietly as you can." With a final nod to Sarah, who had positioned herself behind the boulder with the pistol ready, they set off toward the pass. Jackson glanced back once to see her silhouetted against the night sky, a solitary figure standing firm against approaching danger. Then they rounded a bend in the trail, and she was lost to view. The pass itself was narrower than it had appeared from a distance, barely wide enough for single-file travel with sheer drops on either side. The wind howled through the gap, nearly stealing their breath as they bent into it, fighting for every step forward. They were halfway across when the sound of a gunshot echoed behind them, followed by several more in quick succession. Sarah making good on her promise to delay their pursuers. Keep moving," Jackson urged, though Kimi had frozen at the sound. "She's buying us time. We can't waste it." They pushed on through the pass, the terrain growing even more treacherous on the northern side. The path descended steeply, switchbacking down a slope of loose shale that shifted treacherously underfoot. Dawn was breaking as they reached the bottom of the first descent, casting long shadows across the unfamiliar landscape. Before them stretched a new valley, wilder and more rugged than the one they had left behind, with dense forest covering the lower slopes and a fast-flowing river visible in the distance. Jackson paused to take stock of their situation. They were temporarily safe. The difficult pass would slow their pursuers, especially if Sarah had managed to delay them significantly. But they were now in unknown territory with limited supplies and winter approaching. And they had left behind the one person whose medical knowledge might have seen them through the harsh months ahead. "We find shelter," Nara said, reading his concerns, "before storm comes." She pointed to the northwest, where dark clouds were gathering above the distant peaks. Her weather sense had proven accurate before. If she predicted a storm, they needed to prepare. "You're right," Jackson agreed. "Let's head for those trees. We can follow the river afterward." They made their way down to the forest's edge, the physical exhaustion of their night journey beginning to tell on all of them. Kimmy stumbled frequently now, and even Nara's normally tireless stride had slowed. Within the forest's shelter, Jackson called a halt. They needed rest before continuing storm or no storm. Finding a small clearing protected by thick pines, he helped the girls arrange their blankets while he gathered wood for a small, well-shielded fire. As flames caught and spread among the dry twigs, Kimmy finally asked the question that had surely been on both girls' minds. "Will Sarah be all right?" Jackson wished he could offer reassurance, but false comfort seemed cruel. "I don't know," he admitted. "She's brave and smart. If anyone can talk their way out of trouble, it's Sarah." Nara, arranging her blanket beside her sister's, looked up with eyes too old for her years. "She chose to stay," she said quietly. "Her decision. Honor it." It was a profound observation, one that spoke to Apache values of personal autonomy and respect for individual choice. Jackson nodded, acknowledging the wisdom in her words. "You're right. She made her choice. Now we make ours to survive, to keep going." They ate a sparse meal of jerky and dried berries, then settled down to rest. Jackson intended to keep watch, but exhaustion claimed him almost immediately, pulling him into deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to the sound of thunder much closer now. The fire had burned down to embers, and the light had changed late afternoon. He guessed, meaning they had slept most of the day away. Nara and Kimmy were already awake, huddled together beneath a pine bough they had arranged as additional shelter. "Storm coming fast," Nara reported as he sat up. "Need better shelter." She was right. The makeshift camp offered minimal protection from what sounded like an approaching deluge. They needed to find a cave and overhang something to shield them from the elements. Hastily packing their few belongings, they set out deeper into the forest, searching for suitable shelter. The wind had risen, bending the treetops and sending loose needles showering down around them. Thunder rolled again, closer still. It was Kimmy who spotted the possibility, a dark opening in a rocky outcropping some distance up the slope. "Look," she called, pointing. "Cave, maybe?" They scrambled upward, reaching the opening just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. It wasn't a true cave, but a deep overhang with a sandy floor, enough to provide shelter from the worst of the storm. Inside, they found evidence of previous occupation, old ashes from a fire, a crude stone circle for cooking. Jackson checked carefully for signs of animal habitation before allowing the girls to settle in, but the space appeared to have been used only by humans, and not recently. "We'll wait out the storm here," he decided, setting down his pack. "Rest and recover." The storm broke in earnest sheets of rain, obscuring the view beyond their shelter. Lightning flashed, followed almost immediately by deafening thunder. Kimmy pressed close to Nara, frightened by the intensity of the tempest. "It's just a mountain storm," Jackson assured her, building a small fire near the cave mouth where the smoke could escape. "Violent, but usually short-lived." He was wrong. The storm raged through the evening and into the night, showing no signs of abating. The temperature dropped sharply, and soon sleet mixed with the rain, hissing as it struck the ground outside. Inside their shelter, they huddled around the fire, sharing their remaining blankets for warmth. Jackson realized with growing concern that they were ill-prepared for such conditions. Sarah had been carrying most of their food supplies, and their own packs contained only a few days' worth of provisions. "When storm ends, we hunt," Nara said, as if reading his thoughts. "Make new snares, find food." Her practical approach heartened him. These children were survivors. They had endured worse hardships than this, and emerged stronger. "Yes," he agreed. "And we'll explore this valley, find a place to settle until spring." Kimmy looked up from where she had been dozing against her sister's shoulder. "Then Mexico?" she asked sleepily. "Then Mexico," Jackson confirmed. "If that's still what you want." Nara's expression turned thoughtful. "Apache there," she said. "But not our band, not our ways exactly." It was the first time she had expressed any hesitation about the plan to seek out the Free Apache in Mexico. Jackson understood her concern. Tribal differences were significant, and being Apache didn't automatically mean acceptance by another band. "We have time to decide," he assured her. "Many months before we could travel that far anyway." She nodded, accepting this deferral of a difficult decision. "Sleep now," she suggested. "I take first watch." Jackson wanted to object. She needed rest as much as any of them, but he recognized the offer for what it was, a way for Nara to contribute to maintain her role as protector despite her youth. "Wake me in a few hours," he agreed, settling back against the cave wall. As he drifted toward sleep, lulled by the rhythm of the rain and the warmth of the fire, Jackson found himself thinking of Sarah. Was she safe? Had she been arrested, or worse? And Elias, what had become of his cousin after their departure? He had no answers, only questions that circled in his mind until exhaustion finally claimed him. The storm continued through the night and into the following day, trapping them in the cave. They used the time to rest, to take inventory of their supplies, and to plan their next moves. The forced inactivity was hardest on Kimmy, who grew restless by the second day. To keep her occupied, Jackson fashioned a makeshift checkerboard on a flat stone using light and dark pebbles as pieces. He taught both girls the game, and soon they were engaged in fierce competitions that helped pass the long hours. On the third morning, they woke to silence. The storm had finally blown itself out. Stepping to the cave entrance, Jackson found a transformed landscape. A light dusting of snow covered the ground, unusual for early summer, even at this elevation. The air was crystal clear, revealing distant peaks they hadn't been able to see before. "Beautiful," Kimmy breathed, coming to stand beside him. "Like world made new." It was an apt description. The valley stretched before them, pristine and seemingly untouched by human presence. A fresh start, perhaps, for all of them. But beauty couldn't fill empty stomachs. Their food supplies were dangerously low, and hunting would be challenging in the wet conditions, with game likely sheltering after the storm. "We need to find the river," Jackson decided. "Set fishing lines while we explore." Nara agreed, already packing their few belongings. Fish good, easy to smoke for keeping. They set out, descending through forest still dripping from the recent deluge. The ground was treacherous, slick with wet leaves and hidden roots, forcing them to move slowly and carefully. By midday, they reached the river they had glimpsed from the pass, a substantial waterway, swift with recent rains but clear and cold. Fish darted in the deeper pools, promising sustenance if they could catch them. Jackson fashioned crude fishing hooks from wire in his pack, using strands from his blanket for line. Nara contributed knowledge of which insects would make the best bait, and soon they had several lines set in promising spots. While waiting for fish to bite, they explored the immediate area. The river valley widened as it curved northward, revealing small meadows among the trees. Game trails crisscrossed the underbrush, suggesting deer and perhaps elk were plentiful. "Good place," Nara commented as they surveyed a particularly sheltered meadow near the river. could build cabin here. Jackson followed her gaze, seeing the possibilities. A south-facing slope for protection from northern winds. Abundant water. Trees for building and firewood. Good hunting grounds nearby. It has potential, he agreed, but we should explore more before deciding. They continued downstream, checking their fishing lines as they went. 2 had been successful, yielding modest-sized trout that would provide a welcome change from jerky.
Kimmy volunteered to clean them, demonstrating a skill Jackson hadn't known she possessed. "Mother taught," she explained as she worked with quick, efficient movements. "Said women must know how to feed family." The mention of their mother, something both girls rarely did, caught Jackson's attention. "What was she like?" he asked gently. "Your mother." Kimmy's hands stilled briefly. "Kind," she said after a moment. "Sang beautiful songs, told best stories." Nara, who had been gathering wood for a fire, added quietly, "Strong too, brave, when soldiers came to village before she hid us in special place. Saved us." It was the most either girl had shared about their life before he met them. Jackson absorbed this glimpse into their past, understanding better now the source of their resilience. "She sounds remarkable," he said sincerely. "She'd be proud of you both." A shadow crossed Nara's face. "She wanted us to stay Apache, learn old ways." The implication was clear: living with Jackson, learning English, adopting white ways. Would this have disappointed their mother? "You are still Apache," Jackson said firmly. "Learning new ways doesn't change who you are inside. Your mother wanted you to survive, to grow strong. You're doing that." Nara considered this, then nodded slowly. "Yes, survive first, then keep traditions alive." They made camp by the river that night, the fresh fish providing a feast after days of meager rations. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped again, a reminder that their situation remained precarious despite the day's small successes. "Tomorrow we return to cave," Jackson decided. "Gather our things, then come back here to start building something more permanent." The girls agreed readily. The meadow had felt right to all of them, a place where they might actually establish a home, not just a temporary shelter. As they settled around the fire for the night, Kimmy surprised Jackson by asking, "Will you tell story like Sarah did?" During their time at the cabin, Sarah had often told stories in the evenings, folk tales and legends she had learned as a child. Jackson had no such repertoire to draw from. "I'm not much of a storyteller," he admitted. "Tell about your family," Nara suggested. "Your mother, father, where you come from." It was a reasonable request, yet Jackson hesitated. His past wasn't something he often shared, especially the parts that had led him to the army and eventually to the acts he now regretted. But these children had shared pieces of their history with him. Perhaps it was time to reciprocate. "I grew up in Pennsylvania," he began slowly. "My parents were Quakers, people who believe in peace above all else. They taught that all humans are equal in God's eyes, regardless of color or background." "Good teaching," Nara commented. "Yes," Jackson agreed. "But I was young and restless. When the war came, I saw a chance for adventure, for glory. My parents begged me not to go fighting, went against everything they believed, but I enlisted anyway." He paused, remembering the pain on his mother's face the day he left, the way his father had turned away, unable to watch his son choose a path so contrary to their values. "I thought I was right," he continued. "Thought I was fighting for a just cause, and maybe at first I was. But then I was transferred west to the territories, ordered to fight Indians who were defending their lands, their way of life." Kimmy was watching him intently, absorbing every word. "And you fought?" she asked.
Jackson nodded, shame coloring his voice. I did. For 2 years I followed orders, participated in actions I now recognize as wrong, until finally I couldn't do it anymore. What changed? Nara's question was direct, her gaze steady. There was to be a raid on a village, a camp we knew held mostly women and children. I refused to participate. Told my commanding officer I wouldn't be part of a massacre. What happened? Kimmy prompted when he fell silent. I was given a choice: resign quietly or face court-martial. I chose to leave. Used my discharge pay to buy the homestead in Arizona. Thought I could live out my days alone, not harming anyone else. Then you found us, Nara concluded. No, Jackson corrected gently. Your father found me, saved my life when he had every reason to let me die. Changed everything with one act of mercy. The fire crackled in the silence that followed, sparks rising toward the star-filled sky. Jackson wondered if he had said too much, if the girls would now see him differently, not as protector, but as former enemy. Finally, Nara spoke. Good story, she said simply. Shows people can change. Learn better way. Her acceptance, offered without reservation, touched Jackson deeply. He had expected judgment, or at least wariness. Instead, he received understanding from a child who had every right to hate him for his past. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For listening, for understanding. Kimmy yawned widely, the long day catching up with her. Time for sleep, she announced, curling up on her blanket near the fire. Nara arranged herself beside her sister, but looked back at Jackson before closing her eyes. We family now, she said, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. Family forgave, family accepted. Family moved forward together, past mistakes acknowledged, but not permitted to define the future. As the girls slept, Jackson kept watch, his gaze moving between the peaceful forms by the fire and the vast, star-strewn sky above. For the first time since leaving the cabin, he felt a genuine sense of hope. They had found a place that could become home. They had food, shelter, and each other. The future remained uncertain. Dangers still lurked in the world beyond this valley. But here in this moment, there was peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a shelter to build supplies, to gather preparations for the coming winter. But they would face those challenges together, as the unlikely family they had become. Jackson Hayes, once a soldier who had helped destroy Apache lives, now devoted to protecting 2 Apache children. It was a strange twist of fate, or perhaps, as his mother might have said, the working of Providence. Whatever it was, he knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. In the distance, a wolf howled, a lonely sound that echoed across the valley. Another answered from closer by, then a third. A family pack calling to one another across the night. Fitting, Jackson thought. In a world that had tried to tear them apart, they too had found each other. And like the wolves, they would survive by staying together, by watching out for one another, by remembering always that the strength of the pack was in its bonds. He added wood to the fire, settled his rifle across his knees, and prepared for the long night watch. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, under this vast canopy of stars, they were safe. They were home. And for now, that was enough. The storm passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape, transformed by the first dusting of snow. Standing at the entrance of their makeshift shelter, Jackson surveyed the valley stretching before them, a vast wilderness untouched by the conflicts that had driven them here. The air was crisp and clear, the distant peaks sharply defined against the blue sky. We need to make this work, he said quietly, more to himself than to the girls who were gathering their few belongings behind him. The immediate challenges were clear: find food, establish permanent shelter before winter set in, fully remain hidden from any pursuers who might have followed them across the pass. But beyond these practical concerns lay deeper questions. What future could he truly offer Nara and Kimi in this isolated existence? How long could they remain cut off from the wider world? And what of Sarah? Her sacrifice weighed heavily on his conscience. Had she survived her encounter with the soldiers? Was she imprisoned now, paying the price for helping them? "Ready," Nara announced, interrupting his troubled thoughts. She stood with her small pack, secured Kimi beside her, similarly prepared for travel. Jackson nodded, shouldering his own pack. "We'll head for the river first. Set some fishing lines while we explore. We need food more than anything." They descended through the forest, still dripping from the recent deluge. The ground was treacherous, slick with wet leaves and hidden roots, forcing them to move with deliberate care. Kimi slipped once, falling hard, but rose immediately with the stoicism Jackson had come to expect from both girls. She merely wiped her muddy hands on her trousers and continued without complaint. By midday, they reached the river they had glimpsed from the pass, a substantial waterway, swift with recent rains but clear and cold. Fish darted in the deeper pools, promising sustenance if they could catch them. "There," Jackson said, pointing to a particularly promising spot where the current slowed around a jutting rock. "That's where the bigger fish will rest." He fashioned crude fishing hooks from wire in his pack, using strands from his blanket for line. Nara contributed knowledge of which insects would make the best bait, collecting small black beetles from beneath rotting logs. "Mother showed me," she explained when Jackson expressed surprise at her expertise. "Said women must know how to find food anywhere." They set several lines in promising spots along the river, securing them to flexible branches that would bend when a fish struck, alerting them to a catch. While waiting for fish to bite, they explored the immediate area. The river valley widened as it curved northward, revealing small meadows among the trees. Game trails crisscrossed the underbrush, suggesting deer and perhaps elk were plentiful. In one meadow, sheltered by a semicircle of pines on the north side and open to the southern sun, Jackson paused. The location was ideal, protected from harsh winds, close to water, with good visibility of approaches. "This could work," he said, envisioning the cabin they might build. "Defensible, good water, timber for building." Nara nodded, her practical mind assessing the same qualities. Ground slopes right way. No flooding in spring. Kimi wandered the perimeter of the meadow, examining plants with the careful attention of one who had been taught their uses from earliest childhood. "Many medicines grow here," she reported. "Good sign." They continued their exploration, checking fishing lines as they went. 2 had been successful, yielding modest-sized trout that would provide a welcome change from jerky. Kimi volunteered to clean them again, demonstrating skills beyond her years. "We'll make camp here tonight," Jackson decided as the afternoon waned. "Tomorrow we can start on more permanent shelter." They worked together, preparing the evening meal, each falling naturally into tasks suited to their abilities. Jackson built the fire while Nara arranged stones for cooking, and Kimi prepared the fish. There was comfort in this routine, a sense of family unity that transcended their disparate backgrounds. As they ate sitting close to the fire against the growing evening chill, Kimi surprised Jackson by asking, "Do you miss your family?" From before. The question caught him off guard. The girls rarely inquired about his past, and he had offered little, voluntarily unsure how much they wished to know about the man who had once fought against their people. Sometimes, he admitted, watching the flames dance, "I haven't seen my parents in many years, not since I joined the army against their wishes." "They still alive?" Nara asked, her direct gaze unwavering. Jackson shrugged. I don't know. We stopped writing to each other after I was sent west. After he had begun fighting Indians, he didn't add, but the implication hung in the air. Sad, Kimmy commented simply. Family should stay together. Yes, Jackson agreed. They should. He looked at the sisters, marveling again at the bond between them that had survived so much hardship. You two have done well at that. Nara always protect me, Kimmy said with absolute confidence, even at bad school. Jackson's interest sharpened. The girls had mentioned the government boarding school before, but never in detail. What happened at the school? The sisters exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Nara spoke, her voice carefully controlled. Teachers beat children who speak Apache. Cut hair. Take away clothes. Give white people clothes instead. Her jaw tightened. Say we must forget old ways. Become like white children. But you escaped, Jackson prompted gently. Nara's expression darkened. Man, their teacher tried to hurt Kimmy. At night, when others sleeping. Jackson felt a cold fury build inside him at the implication. What did you do? I kill him, Nara stated, her voice flat. With scissors from sewing room. Then we run. The simple statement hung in the air, momentous, yet delivered without drama. Jackson studied Nara's face, seeing not guilt, but the absolute certainty of someone who had done what was necessary to protect her own. You did what you had to do, he said finally. I would have done the same. Something in Nara's posture eased slightly, though her expression remained grave. Always wondered if Father would understand, if Mother would be ashamed. Your parents would be proud, Jackson assured her. You protected your sister, kept her safe. There's no greater responsibility. Kimmy leaned against her sister, a gesture of silent support. Nara best sister, she said with simple conviction. Always brave. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as the night deepened, but Jackson found his thoughts returning to Nara's revelation. It explained much about her wariness, her fierce protectiveness toward Kimmy, her reluctance to trust. It also illuminated the risk the soldiers represented beyond simple capture. Return to a system that had already traumatized them deeply. His resolve hardened. Whatever it took, he would ensure these children never faced such treatment again. As they prepared for sleep, arranging blankets near the fire, Jackson found himself looking at the stars wheeling overhead. So many. So constant. The same stars had watched over generations of people in these mountains. Apache, white settlers, perhaps others before them all. What did they make of the endless human conflicts played out beneath their eternal gaze? Tomorrow we build, he said softly to the night sky. Make something lasting. They rose with the dawn frost crackling beneath their blankets. The temperature had dropped sharply overnight, a clear warning that winter would arrive early at this elevation. Their breath formed clouds in the morning air as they rekindled the fire and prepared a simple breakfast of remaining fish. We need a more substantial shelter before the heavy snows come, Jackson said, outlining his plan as they ate. Something that can withstand winter storms. Cabin, Kimmy asked, her eyes brightening at the prospect of a real home. Eventually, but that takes time we don't have right now. Jackson gestured toward the hillside bordering the meadow. I'm thinking a dugout first, cut into the sloped timber front. Easier to heat, better protection from wind. Nara nodded approval. Apache sometimes make winter homes this way. Good thinking. The validation pleased him more than he cared to admit. Despite his years in the territories, there was much about indigenous ways he had never bothered to learn during his military service. The realization shamed him now. They spent the morning scouting the perfect location, eventually settling on a spot where the hillside offered a natural hollow that could be expanded. Work began immediately using the few tools they possessed: Jackson's knife, a small hatchet, flat stones for digging. It was grueling labor. The soil was rocky roots, created stubborn barriers, and their tools were inadequate for the task. By midday, they had made frustratingly little progress, their hands blistered and backs aching. "Need better tools," Nara observed, examining the shallow depression they had managed to create. "Take too long this way," Jackson agreed, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool air. "We need an axe, shovel, saw," items they had left behind in their hasty flight from the cabin. "Maybe look for trapper cabin," Kimmy suggested. "Elias said old trappers use these mountains." It was a reasonable suggestion. Trappers were known to maintain multiple cabins throughout their territory, some used only seasonally. If they could find one, it might provide both tools and additional supplies. "Worth trying," Jackson decided. "We'll leave markers so we can find our way back to this spot." They gathered their few belongings and set out following the river upstream. Jackson reasoned that trappers would establish cabins near water sources, and the higher elevations might offer beaver ponds, prime trapping territory. The journey was slow, the terrain increasingly difficult as they climbed. Twice they spotted deer, but Jackson held his fire. The shots might carry to unwanted ears, and they had more urgent needs than meat at the moment. By late afternoon, they had found nothing man-made, though the abundance of game tracks and beaver signs suggested they were in prime trapping country. Jackson was about to suggest they turn back when Kimmy, who had ranged slightly ahead, called out, "Smoke very small, far away." Jackson and Nara hurried to join her. From their elevated position on a rocky outcrop, they could indeed see a thin wisp of smoke rising from the forest perhaps 2 miles distant, near what appeared to be a small lake. "Someone there," Nara said, her body tensing. "Soldiers." Jackson studied the smoke carefully. "I don't think so. Military patrol would have a larger fire. This looks like a single-person's campfire. Probably a trapper or prospector." "We go see?" Kimmy asked, excitement mixing with apprehension in her voice. It was a calculated risk. A lone trapper might be willing to trade tools and information for some of their remaining supplies. Or he might be hostile to Indians, a danger to the girls. There was no way to know without approaching. "I'll go alone," Jackson decided. "You two wait somewhere safe nearby. If I'm not back by nightfall, head back to our meadow and continue with the dugout as best you can." Nara shook her head firmly. "Not safe to separate. We stay together." "It's more dangerous for you to be seen," Jackson argued. "If this person is hostile to Indians—" "We, Apache," Nara interrupted, "know how to approach unseen, better than you." There was no arrogance in her statement, merely practical assessment. Jackson hesitated, then conceded the point. "All right, but we approach with extreme caution. At the first sign of danger, we withdraw immediately." "Agreed." Both girls nodded solemnly, understanding the stakes. They made their way toward the smoke, moving with the careful silence Nara and Kimmy had perfected through necessity, and Jackson had learned through years on the frontier. As they drew closer, the scent of wood smoke mingled with another aroma: cooking meat, rich and savory. The forest opened onto the shore of a small lake, its surface rippling gently in the afternoon breeze. On the far bank stood a sturdy log cabin, smoke curling from its stone chimney. A canoe was pulled up on the shore nearby, and fishing lines stretched into the water from crude docks. "Someone lives here permanently," Jackson observed, studying the well-established homestead. "Not just a trapper's seasonal cabin." They watched from concealment for nearly an hour, but saw no movement around the cabin. Finally, Jackson made his decision. I'm going to approach openly. You two stay hidden unless I signal it's safe. Nara nodded reluctantly. Be careful. People alone in mountains sometimes crazy. It was a fair warning. Isolation could warp a person's mind, turn them paranoid or dangerous. Jackson checked his pistol, ensuring it was loaded and accessible, then stepped out of the forest and began walking around the lake toward the cabin. He was halfway there when the cabin door opened. A figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, a rifle held casually but ready. As the distance closed between them, Jackson could make out more details. An older man, perhaps 60, with a full white beard and weathered skin that spoke of decades outdoors. That's far enough, stranger, the man called when Jackson was still 20 yards away. State your business. Jackson stopped, keeping his hands visible. Name's Hayes. Looking for someone who might trade tools for supplies, trying to establish a camp before winter. The old man studied him skeptically. Bit late in the season to be setting up new camp. Most folk with sense are already prepared for snow. Had to leave our previous shelter unexpectedly, Jackson explained, offering no details. Running from something, then? It wasn't a question. The man lowered his rifle slightly. Or someone. Jackson didn't reply, letting the silence speak for itself. After a long moment, the old man grunted. Wouldn't be the first to seek refuge in these mountains. Name's Henry Blackwood. Been here 15 years. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Blackwood. Just Blackwood will do. The old man glanced past Jackson toward the forest. Your friends going to join us, or they prefer hiding in the trees? Jackson stiffened. He hadn't realized the girls had been spotted. Blackwood's mouth twitched beneath his beard. 20 years with the mountain Apache before settling here. Taught me a thing or two about noticing what doesn't want to be noticed. The casual mention of Apache connection changed the calculation entirely. Jackson turned and raised his hand in the signal they had agreed upon. After a moment's hesitation, Nara and Kimmy emerged from the trees, approaching cautiously. Blackwood's eyebrows rose as he took in the two girls. Well now, this is unexpected. He studied them with keen interest. Chiricahua, by the look. Long way from home. Nara stared back at him, her expression guarded but curious. You know our people, lived among them from 42 to 62. Married one of them, matter of fact. Sadness flickered across his weathered features. Lost her in the last big sickness. Decided to head north afterward, find some peace. Jackson watched this exchange with growing amazement. Of all the people they might have encountered in this wilderness, they had stumbled upon perhaps the one man who might truly understand their situation. You said you need tools. Blackwood continued, returning his attention to Jackson. What sort of camp are you building? Dugout to start. Proper cabin, if we have time before deep winter. Blackwood nodded approval. Sensible. Dugout's warmer anyway. He seemed to come to a decision. Got spare tools I can part with. Come inside, we'll discuss terms. He turned toward the cabin, then paused, looking back at Nara and Kimmy. Ke shil holo, he said in what Jackson recognized as Apache.
Hagoni niha nidawile. Nara's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in assessment. Your accent's strange, she replied in English. But words right. Where you learn, from my wife. She was Dine-e Sizani, the Black Sand Clan. Blackwood switched back to English. Now come inside before we all catch cold, standing around. The interior of the cabin was surprisingly spacious and meticulously organized. Furs lined the walls, for insulation tools hung from carefully placed pegs, and shelves held provisions enough for months of isolation. A large fireplace dominated one wall, its dancing flames casting warm light throughout the single room. Sit, Blackwood directed, gesturing to a table crafted from split logs. I've got stew on the fire, enough for all.
As he served the simple but hearty meal, venison, wild onions, and roots in a rich broth, Blackwood asked no direct questions about their circumstances. Instead, he spoke of practical matters, the coming winter likely to be harsh by his reading of the signs, good hunting grounds nearby, the habits of the local wolf packs. Only after they had eaten the edge taken off their hunger did he address the obvious. "Army looking for you, I'd wager." Jackson tensed, but nodded. "Yes?" "Figured as much. Patrol came through 3 days ago. 4 men asking if I'd seen any Indians or white renegades in the area." Blackwood's expression revealed nothing. "Told them I hadn't," which was true at the time. "And now?" Nara asked directly. Blackwood met her gaze with equal directness. "Now I'm having a meal with guests who happened by. What happens after that depends on several things." "Such as," Jackson prompted, "such as why the Army's after 2 Apache children and a white man. Such as whether harboring you brings trouble to my doorstep. Such as whether you're the kind of folk worth taking a risk for." It was bluntly stated, but fair. Jackson glanced at Nara, who gave a slight nod, granting permission to share their story. He told it simply, without embellishment. His debt to Takimi, his care for the girls through winter, their flight from authorities who would separate them, Sarah's sacrifice to ensure their escape. He omitted certain details, Nara's killing of the school official, his own military history, but provided enough truth to explain their situation. Blackwood listened without interruption, his weathered face impossible to read. When Jackson finished, silence settled over the cabin, broken only by the crackling of the fire. Finally, the old man spoke. "Army's not likely to give up easy. Those boarding schools are a pet project of the government. They want Indian children civilized, whether the children want it or not." "We not go back," Kimmy stated with surprising firmness. "Rather die in mountains." Blackwood studied her, something like approval in his gaze. "Got your mother's spirit, I'd say." He turned to Jackson. "Your dugout plan is sound, but you're starting too late. First heavy snow could come any day now." "We don't have much choice," Jackson replied. "We need shelter before winter." "There's another option." Blackwood stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I've got a second cabin about 10 miles northeast of here. Built it as a fall hunting camp, but I don't use it much these days. Too far to check trap lines efficiently." Hope flared in Jackson's chest. "You're offering to let us use it?" "Might be. Place is solid. Not as comfortable as this, but it'll keep out the cold. Has a good root cellar, too, still stocked with last year's preserves." It seemed too fortunate to be true. Jackson searched for the catch. "And in return," Blackwood shrugged, "could use help with hunting this winter. Getting harder to bring down an elk on my own at my age, and company during the long months wouldn't go amiss." He glanced at the girls. "Been a while since I heard Apache spoken. Miss the sound of it." Nara, who had remained watchful throughout the conversation, spoke up. "Why help us risk for you?" "Fair question." Blackwood's eyes took on a distant look. "When my wife died, her people helped me through the worst grief I've ever known. Treated me like family, even though I was white. Figure I owe something back." He refocused on Nara. "Besides, I've seen what those schools do to children. No child deserves that." Jackson glanced at the girls, seeing the same cautious hope in their eyes that he felt himself. It seemed Providential Shelter already built a potential ally who understood Apache ways and relative safety from immediate pursuit. "We'd be grateful for the use of your cabin," he said, "and happy to help with hunting or anything else you need." Blackwood nodded once decisively. "Then it's settled. We'll head there tomorrow. Too late to start today." He rose from the table. "I'll show you where you can sleep tonight." As the old man gathered extra blankets from a chest, Kimmy tugged at Jackson's sleeve, her expression troubled. "Can we trust?" she whispered. "Maybe trick." It was the essential question. Blackwood seemed genuine, but they had no way to verify his story or his intentions. Yet instinct told Jackson the old man was being straight with them. "I think we can," he replied quietly, "but we'll stay alert just in case." Nara, overhearing, gave a small nod of agreement. Trust, but verify, it had become their way of survival. Blackwood arranged sleeping pallets near the fire, then excused himself to check his fishing lines before dark. Once alone, the three visitors conferred in hushed tones. "What you think?" Jackson asked Nara, valuing her perceptiveness. She considered the question seriously. "He knows Apache ways, speaks some words, eyes honest when talk about wife." She paused. "But still white man. Many white men start friendly, then change." "He's lived alone a long time," Jackson acknowledged. "People can grow strange in isolation." "Cabin better than dugout," Kimmy pointed out practically. "And he has food." They weighed the risks against the benefits, eventually deciding to accept Blackwood's offer while maintaining vigilance. The alternative, continuing their desperate race against winter with inadequate tools and supplies, offered slim chances of success. When Blackwood returned with fresh fish for tomorrow's breakfast, they informed him of their decision. The old man merely nodded, as if he'd expected nothing else. That night, as wind rattled the cabin's sturdy walls, Jackson lay awake on his pallet, listening to the regular breathing of the girls nearby. They had found shelter, possibly even an ally. Yet uncertainty remained their constant companion. What of Sarah? Had she survived her encounter with the soldiers? And Elias, was he safe? Or had he faced repercussions for helping them? Questions without answers, concerns that gnawed at Jackson's conscience in the quiet hours. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, drawing him into dreams where Sarah stood on a distant ridge, beckoning them toward some unseen sanctuary beyond the mountains. Morning brought clear skies and a sharp frost that rimmed every leaf and twig with silver. After a breakfast of pan-fried fish and cornbread, they prepared for the journey to Blackwood's hunting cabin. The old man worked efficiently, packing supplies, selecting tools they would need, offering practical advice about winter survival in these mountains. Jackson found himself impressed by Blackwood's methodical approach and extensive knowledge. "Lived through 15 winters up here," the old man explained when Jackson commented on his thoroughness. "First one nearly killed me. Learn quick or don't survive." By mid-morning, they were ready to depart. Blackwood led the way, setting a pace that acknowledged the girls' shorter legs while covering ground steadily. The route took them through dense forest, across small streams, and along game trails worn into the earth by generations of deer and elk. Blackwood proved a knowledgeable guide, pointing out useful plants, explaining which berries were safe to eat this late in the season, identifying animal tracks they crossed. Kimmy absorbed this information eagerly, while Nara remained more reserved, watching and listening but offering little. "Your sister always so quiet," Blackwood asked Jackson during a brief rest, gesturing toward Nara, who stood slightly apart, scanning their back trail. "She's cautious by nature," Jackson replied. "Has good reason to be." Blackwood nodded understanding. "Apache women are the backbone of the people, strong, practical, make most of the important decisions, though the men don't always admit it." A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "My wife could stare down a mountain lion when she set her mind to something." This glimpse into Blackwood's past relationship with an Apache woman reassured Jackson further. The old man spoke with genuine respect and affection, not the patronizing tone many white men adopted when discussing Indians. They reached the hunting cabin by mid-afternoon. It was smaller than Blackwood's main dwelling but solidly built, situated on a small rise overlooking a meadow where elk might graze. A stream ran nearby, providing fresh water. "Not much to look at," Blackwood acknowledged as they approached, "but it's weather-tight and has a good fireplace." The interior was dusty from disuse, but sound. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, rough-hewn furniture occupied the center of the single room, and bunks built into the opposite wall provided sleeping space. A trap door in the floor led to a root cellar, which Blackwood showed them with evident pride. "Still got preserved venison, dried berries, some roots. Not enough for the whole winter, but it'll supplement what you hunt." Jackson examined the cabin with growing appreciation. The structure was well designed for the harsh climate, with thick walls, a sloped roof to shed snow, and small windows that would minimize heat loss. This is more than we could have hoped for," he told Blackwood sincerely. "We're in your debt." The old man waved this away. "No debts between neighbors up here. Survival depends on helping each other." They spent the remainder of the day making the cabin habitable, sweeping out dust, checking for any damage that needed repair, bringing in firewood from the stacked pile behind the structure. Blackwood worked alongside them, showing how the chimney could be adjusted for better draw, where to find the emergency supplies he kept buried beneath a marked tree. As evening approached, he prepared to return to his own cabin. "I'll come check on you in a week or so," he promised. "Sooner if the weather turns bad suddenly." He handed Jackson a crude map drawn on a piece of bark. "This shows the best hunting grounds nearby. Elk moving down from higher elevations already. You should be able to take one before the deep snow comes." Jackson accepted the map with gratitude. "We'll be fine. Don't risk yourself in bad weather on our account." Blackwood's weathered face creased in a rare smile. "Been traveling these mountains in all conditions for decades. Take more than a little snow to keep me home." With final instructions about maintaining the fireplace and securing the doors against predators, the old man departed, following the trail they had used earlier while there was still light to see by. As his figure disappeared among the trees, Nara finally relaxed her vigilant posture. Good man," she declared, surprising Jackson with the definitive judgment. "Has Apache heart?" "You think so?" Jackson had been leaning toward the same conclusion, but valued her assessment. She nodded firmly. "Eyes honest, hands work hard. Respects old ways." High praise indeed from the usually reserved girl. Kimmy, exploring the cabin's interior with childlike curiosity, called out excitedly from the root cellar, "Look, honey!" She emerged with a small clay pot sealed with wax. "A feast tonight, then," Jackson decided, feeling truly hopeful for the first time since their flight across the pass. "To celebrate our new home." Home. The word resonated differently now. Not just shelter, but a place of safety, of potential permanence. The mountain winter still posed challenges, but with this sturdy cabin, stored food, and Blackwood's knowledge to guide them, survival seemed not just possible, but likely. That evening, as they sat around the fire after a simple but satisfying meal, Kimmy surprised Jackson by asking, "Can we stay here forever?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Forever. Permanence, belonging. "If we choose to," Jackson replied carefully, "but we should see how the winter goes first. And there's still the matter of Mexico to consider." Nara, who had been mending a tear in her shirt with sinew thread from their supplies, looked up. "Mexico far away. Many dangers between here and there." "Yes," Jackson agreed. "And we don't know for certain what we'd find there. The Apache bands in Mexico might not welcome outsiders." "Even other Apache?" Kimmy asked, frowning. "Different bands have different ways," Nara explained to her sister. "Not all Apache same, like not all white people same." It was a perceptive observation that highlighted Nara's growing understanding of the complexities beyond the simple us versus them divide. "What you want?" Kimmy asked Jackson directly. "Stay here or go Mexico?" It was a question he had been asking himself for weeks. What did he want? To continue this newfound family they had created, to help the girls find their own people, to atone for his past by ensuring their future. "I want what's best for you and Nara," he answered honestly. "Safety, a chance to grow up without fear. Whether that's here or somewhere else, I'm not sure yet." Nara set aside her mending, her expression unusually open. "What about Sarah Elias? We leave them behind forever." The question pierced Jackson's carefully maintained composure. He had been trying not to dwell on those they had left behind, focusing instead on immediate survival. But Nara's words brought the concern rushing back. "I don't know," he admitted, the uncertainty painful. Sarah knew the risks when she stayed behind, Elias too. But if there were a way to find out if they're safe, to let them know we're alive, maybe Black would help, Kimmy suggested. "He go to town sometimes." It was possible. The old man must venture to settlements occasionally for supplies he couldn't produce himself. Perhaps he could make discreet inquiries about Sarah's fate, even get a message to Elias if it could be done safely. "We'll ask him when he visits next," Jackson decided. "But we must be careful. We can't risk bringing trouble to his door after all he's done for us." The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns: how they would arrange the cabin for sleeping, what tasks needed priority in the coming days, how they would supplement their stored food with fresh game. Practical matters that grounded them in the present, rather than uncertainties of the future. As the girls prepared for sleep, arranging blankets on the bunks built into the wall, Jackson stepped outside to check the weather one last time. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant in the black vault overhead. No sign of approaching storms, but the bitter chill confirmed winter's rapid approach. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the cabin clearing. Jackson tensed, hand moving to his pistol eyes, straining to penetrate the gloom. A shadow moved at the forest's edge. Large, four-legged. Wolf. The animal stood motionless, watching the cabin, its eyes reflecting the faint light spilling from the window. After a moment, it was joined by another, then a third. A small pack assessing this new intrusion into their territory. Jackson remained still, respecting their right to investigate. These weren't immediate threats. Wolves rarely attacked humans unless desperate, but their presence reminded him of the wilderness's constant dangers. Winter would bring hunger, and hungry predators grew bolder. The lead wolf raised its muzzle, testing the air, then turned away. The others followed, melting back into the forest as silently as they had appeared. Message delivered: "We are watching. This is our land too." Jackson acknowledged the warning with a slight nod. They would need to be vigilant, especially when the girls were outside the cabin. Another responsibility to add to the growing list. When he returned inside, he found Nara still awake, sitting by the fire. She looked up as he entered, reading his expression. "Wolves," she said, not a question. Jackson nodded, unsurprised by her perception. "Just watching for now." "Wolves respect strength," she observed, "but test weakness." "Like most creatures," Jackson agreed, settling beside her. "Including people." Nara poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling up the chimney. "You think soldiers still looking?" The question had lurked beneath the surface of all their decisions. "Yes," he answered honestly, "but they have vast territories to patrol and limited men. They can't search everywhere, especially with winter coming. But not give up. No, not completely." There was no point offering false reassurance. "But every day puts more distance between us and them. Every snowfall covers our tracks more thoroughly." Nara absorbed this, her young face solemn in the firelight. Sarah knew this would happen, still stayed behind. She made her choice, Jackson said gently. A brave one. Like father did, Nara murmured so quietly he almost missed it. Chose to save you, knowing he would die. The parallel struck Jackson forcefully. Both Takimi and Sarah had sacrificed themselves to protect others' conscious choices made with full awareness of the likely consequences. Yes, he agreed, humbled by the comparison. Very much like your father did. Nara stared into the flames, her profile so like Takimi's in that moment that Jackson's breath caught. Apache believes spirits of brave ones watch over family, protect them. It's a good belief, Jackson said. My mother thought something similar. That those we've lost remain close somehow. You think Sarah dead? Nara asked directly. Jackson considered the question carefully. I don't know. She's resourceful, intelligent. If anyone could talk their way out of trouble, it's Sarah. He sighed. But the army doesn't look kindly on those who help fugitives. Nara nodded, accepting this ambiguity. Either way, she with us still. Her teaching helps Kimi read. Her medicine knowledge keeps us healthy. It was a profound observation from one so young that influence continued beyond physical presence, that those who had shaped their lives remained part of them, regardless of separation or even death. You're very wise for your age, Nara, Jackson said softly. She shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. Just see what is. Apache children learn early that life includes death, not hide from truth. Another lesson that white society often failed to teach its children, Jackson reflected. So much energy spent shielding the young from life's harsher realities, only for those realities to strike with greater force when eventually encountered. Try sleep now, Nara suggested, rising from her place by the fire. Tomorrow, much work to prepare for winter. She was right, as usual. Jackson banked the fire for the night, while Nara settled into the bunk beside her already sleeping sister. Within moments, her breathing had deepened the day's exertions, claiming her despite the many concerns they had discussed. Jackson took longer to find rest. His mind circled through their situation, identifying threats, planning responses, calculating supplies against likely needs. The responsibility for these children's lives weighed heavily, yet he found he wouldn't have it any other way. They had become his purpose, his reason for continuing when it would have been easier to surrender to the army or simply disappear alone into the wilderness. Nara and Kimi needed him, yes, but he needed them equally. Their resilience inspired his own. Their hope rekindled what had nearly died within him. As sleep finally approached, Jackson's last conscious thought was a prayer of sorts directed not to the God of his childhood, but to whatever forces might be listening in this vast, indifferent wilderness. Keep them safe. Let me be enough to see them through. The next 2 weeks established a rhythm to their days. Mornings began before dawn with fire building and breakfast preparation. Then came the day's essential tasks, hunting, gathering the last edible plants before winter killed them, collecting and chopping firewood, making repairs to the cabin where needed. Jackson focused on securing meat for the winter, taking a young elk in the first week, and carefully preserving every usable part. Nara proved adept at smoking the meat, while Kimi's knowledge of plants helped identify which wild herbs would best preserve and flavor it. The girls continued their education during the evenings, practicing reading by firelight, using the few books Blackwood had left in the cabin, a farmer's almanac, a tattered Bible similar to the one Sarah had kept, and a manual on wilderness survival. Kimi especially took to reading, often sounding out words long after Nara had fallen asleep. Blackwood visited twice, as promised, bringing additional supplies, each time coffee, which Jackson had sorely missed, needles and thread for mending, a small cooking pot to replace one that had developed a crack. On his second visit, he brought news. "Soldiers have pulled back to the fort for winter," he reported as they shared coffee around the cabin's table. "Heavy snow in the passes has them convinced no one could survive up here anyway." Relief washed through Jackson. "So they've given up the search." Blackwood shook his head. "Not given up. Postponed. They'll be back in spring, I'd wager. But you've got a few months' reprieve at least." It was better than nothing. Winter would give them time to strengthen to plan to decide their next move when the mountain passes cleared. "What about Sarah?" Jackson asked the question he'd been holding since Blackwood's arrival. "Any word?" The old man's face grew somber. "Some. The woman who helped you, older lady. Medical knowledge?" "Yes." Jackson confirmed tension building in his chest. "What happened to her?" "Arrested initially, held at Fort Lyon for questioning about your whereabouts." Blackwood took a long sip of his coffee. "Story goes, she told them nothing useful. Eventually, they had to release her, not enough evidence to hold her, and some influential folks from the Quaker settlement raised a fuss about her treatment." Jackson released the breath he'd been holding. "She's free then. Free but watched. Can't leave the territory, but alive, and apparently well according to my sources in town." It was better news than Jackson had dared hope for. Sarah had survived, had maintained her silence despite whatever pressures the army had applied. The debt he owed her grew with this knowledge. "And Elias?" he asked. "My cousin." Questioned too, but never held. "Seems he convinced them he was as surprised by your disappearance as they were." Blackwood's eyes crinkled with something like approval. "Smart man, your cousin." This, too, was welcome news. Elias had apparently avoided serious consequences for his role in their escape. Jackson sent silent thanks to whatever providence had protected both Sarah and Elias from the worst potential outcomes. "There's something else," Blackwood added, his tone shifting slightly. "News that might interest you particularly." "What's that?" "Word from Arizona Territory. The army there has been pulled back from some areas. Budget cuts in Washington, they say, but others claim it's political. Too many reports of heavy-handed tactics against peaceful tribes." Jackson absorbed this, understanding the potential significance. "So there's less military presence in the territories now?" Blackwood nodded. "For the moment. These things change with the political winds, of course. But it might mean safer passage if you're still considering Mexico come spring." The information added another factor to their ongoing deliberations about future plans. Reduced military presence might indeed make travel southward less dangerous, but it remained a perilous proposition with 2 Apache children in tow. As if reading his thoughts, Nara spoke up from where she had been listening quietly. "Mexico's still far. Many dangers besides soldiers." "True enough," Blackwood acknowledged. "Bandits, harsh country, hostile settlers. Not a journey to undertake lightly." The conversation shifted to more immediate concerns, the unusually heavy early snowfall signs that game was moving to lower elevations techniques for keeping the cabin warm during the coldest months ahead. Before departing, Blackwood took Jackson aside, speaking in a low voice that wouldn't carry to the girls. "There's something else you should know. Not confirmed, just rumor." Jackson tensed, expecting bad news. "Go on." "Talk in town about a new policy. Come spring, the Army's been ordered to collect all Indian children for the boarding schools. No exceptions, no hiding by their families." Blackwood's weathered face was grim. "They're calling it the final solution to the Indian problem." The phrasing chilled Jackson to his core. Meaning what exactly? Meaning they intend to separate every Indian child from their culture, their language, their traditions, raise them white, in effect. Blackwood spat into the snow, killing the Indian to save the man they call it. It was genocide of a different sort, not physically killing the people, but systematically destroying everything that made them who they were. The implications for Nara and Kimi were clear. Then Mexico becomes more appealing, Jackson said quietly, or somewhere beyond the army's reach. Blackwood nodded. Just thought you should know. Gives you winter to consider options. After the old man's departure, Jackson found himself watching the girls with renewed concern. They had already endured so much, the destruction of their village, the loss of their parents, the trauma of the boarding school they had briefly experienced. Now the government seemed determined to complete the erasure of their identity, to transform them into something unrecognizable to their ancestors. He wouldn't allow it. Whatever it took, whatever risks required, he would ensure Nara and Kimi remained free to be who they were born to be. The promise he had made to Takimi had evolved into something deeper, not just protection of their physical safety, but preservation of their very souls. That evening, as snow fell steadily outside, Jackson watched Kimi practicing her reading, sounding out words from the Bible with growing confidence. Nara sat nearby, mending one of Kimi's shirts, with the neat stitches Sarah had taught her. The scene was peaceful, domestic, a moment of normalcy amid their extraordinary circumstances. Yet beneath this tranquil surface, Jackson felt the currents of change gathering force. Their winter sanctuary was temporary. Decisions would be required when spring came. Mexico remained a possibility, but distant and fraught with its own dangers. Remaining in these mountains meant perpetual vigilance, always watching for the return of soldiers or other threats. There were no easy answers, no path without risk. But looking at these children, who had become his family, Jackson knew with absolute certainty that he would face whatever came, endure whatever hardships necessary to secure their future. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white, obscuring their tracks, and providing the protection of isolation. For now, at least, they were safe. And in this moment, that was enough.